is locked away here in the dungeon. The Amyrlin, midway in nodding approval, gave her a questioning look, but she did not pause. They will travel as safely as I can manage, Siwan, and when Rand needs me in Ilion, I will be there, and I will see that it is he who presents the horn to the Council of Nine and the assemblage. I will see to everything in Ilion. Siwan, the Ilianers would follow the dragon or Baal Zaman himself if he came bearing the horn of Valir, and so will the greater part of those gathered for the hunt. The true dragon reborn will not need to gather a following before nations move against him. He will begin with a nation around him and an army at his back. The Amyrlin dropped back into her chair, but immediately leaned forward. She seemed caught between weariness and hope. But will he proclaim himself? If he's afraid, the light knows he should be Moiraine, but men who name themselves as the dragon want the power. If he does not, I have the means to see him named dragon whether he wills it or not. And even if I somehow fail, the pattern itself will see him named dragon whether he wills it or not. Remember, he is ta'veren, Siwan. He has no more control over his fate than a candlewick has over the flame. The Amyrlin sighed. It's risky, Moiraine. Risky. But my father used to say, girl, if you won't take a chance, you'll never win a copper. We have plans to make. Sit down. This won't be done quickly. I will send for wine and cheese. Moiraine shook her head. We have been closeted alone too long already. If any did try listening and found your warding, they will be wondering already. It is not worth the risk. We can contrive another meeting tomorrow. Besides, my dearest friend, I cannot tell you everything, and I cannot risk letting you know I am holding anything back. I suppose you are right. But first thing in the morning, there's so much I have to know. The morning, Moiraine agreed. The Amyrlin rose, and they hugged again. In the morning I will tell you everything you need to know. Lyanna gave Moiraine a sharp look when she came out into the anteroom, then darted into the Amyrlin's chamber. Moiraine tried to put on a chastened face, as if she had endured one of the Amyrlin's infamous upbraidings. Most women, however strong-willed, returned from those, big-eyed and weak-kneed, but the expression was foreign to her. She looked more tired than anything else, which served much the same purpose. She was only vaguely aware of the other women in the outer room. She thought some had gone and others come since she went in, but she barely looked at them. The hour was growing late, and there was much to be done before the morning came. Much before she spoke to the Amyrlin's seat again. Quickening her step, she moved deeper into the keep.
The column would have made an impressive sight, moving through the Taraban night to the jangle of harness, had there been anyone to see it. A full 2,000 children of the light, well mounted, in white tabards and cloaks, armor burnished, with their train of supply wagons and farriers and grooms with the strings of remounts. There were villages in this sparsely forested country, but they had left roads behind, and stayed clear of even farmers' crofts. They were to meet someone at a fly-speck village near the northern border of Taraban, at the edge of Almuth Plain. Jeffron Bornhold, riding at the head of his men, wondered what it was all about. He remembered too well his interview with Pedron Niall, Lord Captain Commander of the Children of the Light, in Amador. But he had learned little there. "We are alone, Jeffron," the white-haired man had said. His voice was thin and reedy with age. "I remember giving you the oath. What, 36 years ago it must be now?" Bornhold straightened. "My Lord Captain Commander, may I ask why I was called back from Caemlyn, and with such urgency? A push and Morghese could be toppled. There are houses in Andor that see dealing with Tar Valon as we do, and they were ready to lay claim to the throne. I left Eamon Valda in charge, but he seemed intent on following the daughter heir to Tar Valon. I would not be to learn the man has kidnapped the girl, or even attacked Tar Valon." And Dane, Bornhold's son, had arrived just before Bornhold was recalled. Dane was full of zeal. Too much zeal sometimes. Enough to fall in blindly with whatever Valda proposed. Volta walks in the light, Jephram. But you are the best battle commander among the children. You will assemble a full legion, the best men you can find, and take them into Taraban, avoiding any eyes attached to a tongue that may speak. Any such tongue must be silenced if the eyes see. Bornhold hesitated. 50 children together, or even 100, could enter any land without question, at least without open question. But an entire legion? Is it war, my Lord Captain Commander? There is talk in the streets. Wild rumors, mainly, about Otter Hawkwing's army's comeback. The old man did not speak. The king does not command the children, Captain Bornhold. For the first time, there was a sharp snap in the Lord Commander's voice. I do. Let the king sit in his palace and do what he does best. Nothing. You will be met at a village called Alcruna, and there you will receive your final orders. I expect your legion to ride in 3 days. Now go, Jephram. You have work to do. Bornhold frowned. Pardon, my Lord Captain Commander, but who will meet me? Why am I risking war with Taraban? You will be told what you must know when you reach Alcruna. The Lord Captain Commander suddenly looked more than his age. Absently, he plucked at his white tunic, with the golden sunburst of the children large on the chest. There are forces at work beyond what you know, Jephram. Beyond what even you can know. Choose your men quickly. Now go. Ask me no more. And the light ride with you. Now Bornhold straightened in his saddle, working a knot out of his back. I am getting old, he thought. A day and a night in the saddle, with 2 pauses to water the horses, and he felt every gray hair on his head. He would not even have noticed a few years ago. At least I have not killed any innocents. He could be as hard on Dark Friends as any man sworn to the light. Dark Friends must be destroyed before they pulled the whole world into the shadow. But he wanted to be sure they were Dark Friends first. It had been difficult avoiding Tarabaner eyes with so many men, even in the backcountry. But he had managed it. No tongues had needed to be silenced. The scouts he sent out came riding back, and behind them came more men in white cloaks, some carrying torches to ruin the night vision of everyone at the head of the column. With a muttered curse, Bornhold ordered a halt while he studied those who came to meet him. Their cloaks bore the same golden sunburst on the breast as his, the same as every child of the light, and their leader even had golden knots of rank below it, equivalent to Bornhold's. But behind their sunbursts were red shepherd's crooks, questioners. With hot irons and pincers and dripping water, the questioners pulled confession and repentance from Dark Friends. But there were those who said they decided guilt before they ever knew. Jephram Bornhold was one who said it. I have been sent here to meet questioners. We have been waiting for you, Lord Captain Bornhold, the leader said in a harsh voice. He was a tall, hook-nosed man with the gleam of certainty in his eyes that every questioner had. You could have made better time. I am Einar Saren, second to Jakim Karadin, who commands the Hand of the Light in Taraban. The Hand of the Light, the hand that dug out truth, so they said. They did not like the name questioners. There is a bridge at the village. We will talk in the inn. It is surprisingly comfortable. I was told by the Lord Captain Commander himself to avoid all eyes. The village has been pacified. Now move your men. I command now. I have orders with the Lord Captain Commander's seal if you doubt. Bornhold suppressed the growl that rose in his throat. Pacified. He wondered if the bodies had been piled outside the village or if they had been thrown into the river. It would be like the questioners, cold enough to kill an entire village for secrecy, and stupid enough to throw the bodies into the river to float downstream and trumpet their deed from Alcruna to Tanchico. What I doubt is why I am in Taraban with 2,000 men, questioner. Saren's face tightened, but his voice remained harsh and demanding. It is simple, Lord Captain. There are towns and villages across Almouth Plain with none in authority above a mayor or a town council. It is past time they were brought to the light. There will be many dark friends in such places. Bornhold's horse stamped. Are you saying, Saren, that I brought an entire legion across most of Tarabon in secrecy to root a few dark friends out of some grubby villages? To do as you are told, Bornhold. To do the work of the light. Are you sliding from the light? Saren's smile was a grimace. If battle is what you seek, you may have your chance. The strangers have a great force on Toman Head. More than Tarabon and Arat Doman together may be able to hold, even if they can stop their own bickering long enough to work together. If the strangers break through, you will have all the fighting you can handle. The Taraboners claim the strangers are monsters, creatures of the Dark One. Some say they have Aes Sedai to fight for them. If they are dark friends, these strangers, they will have to be dealt with too, in their turn. For a moment, Bornhold stopped breathing. Then the rumors are true. Arthur Hawkwing's armies have returned. Strangers, Saren said flatly. He sounded as if he regretted having mentioned them. Strangers and probably dark friends from wherever they came. That is all we know and all you need to know. They do not concern you now. We are wasting time. Move your men across the river, Bornhold. I will give you your orders in the village. He whirled his horse and galloped back the way he had come, his torchbearers riding at his heels. Bornhold closed his eyes to hasten the return of his night sight. We are being used like stones on a board. Fire! He opened his eyes as his second appeared at his side, stiffening in his saddle before the Lord Captain. The gaunt-faced man had almost the questioner's light in his eyes, but he was a good soldier despite. There is a bridge ahead. Move the Legion across the river and make camp. I will join you as soon as I can. He gathered his reins and rode in the direction the questioner had taken. Stones on a board. But who is moving us? And why?
Afternoon shadows gave way to evening as Liandrin made her way through the women's apartments. Beyond the arrow slits, darkness grew and pressed on the light from the lamps in the corridor. Twilight was a troubled time for Liandrin of late. That and dawn. At dawn the day was born, just as twilight gave birth to night. But at dawn, night died, and at twilight, day. The Dark One's power was rooted in death. He gained power from death, and at those times she thought she could feel power stirring. Something stirred in the half-dark at least, something she almost thought she could catch if she turned quickly enough, something she was sure she could see if she looked hard enough. Serving women in black and gold curtsied as she passed, but she did not respond. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead and did not see them. At the door she sought, she paused for a quick glance up and down the hall. The only women in sight were servants. There were no men, of course. She pushed open the door and went in without knocking. The outer room of the Lady Amalisa's chambers were brightly lit, and a blazing fire on the hearth held back the chill of the Shinaran night. Amalisa and her ladies sat about the room in chairs and on the layered carpets, listening while one of their number, standing, read aloud to them. It was The Dance of the Hawk and the Hummingbird by Tevin Erwin, which purported to set forth the proper conduct of men toward women and women toward men. Liandrin's mouth tightened. She certainly had not read it, but she had heard as much as she needed about it. Amalisa and her ladies greeted each pronouncement with gales of laughter, falling against each other and drumming their heels on the carpets like girls. The reader was the first to become aware of Liandrin's presence. She cut off with a surprised widening of her eyes. The others turned to see what she was staring at, and silence replaced laughter. All but Amalisa scrambled to their feet, hastily smoothing hair and skirts. The Lady Amalisa rose gracefully with a smile. "You honor us with your presence, Liandrin. This is a most pleasant surprise. I did not expect you until tomorrow. I thought you would want to rest after your long journey. Liandrin cut her off sharply, addressing the air. I will speak to the Lady Amalisa alone. All of you will leave. Now. There was a moment of shocked silence. Then the other women made their goodbyes to Amalisa. One by one they curtsied to Liandrin, but she did not acknowledge them. She continued to stare straight ahead at nothing, but she saw them and heard. Honorifics offered with breathy unease at the Aes Sedai's mood, eyes falling when she ignored them. They squeezed past her to the door, pressing back awkwardly so their skirts did not disturb hers. As the door closed behind the last of them, Amalisa said, Liandrin, I do not understand. Do you walk in the light, my daughter? There would be none of that foolishness of calling her sister here. The other woman was older by some years, but the ancient forms would be observed. However long they had been forgotten, it was time they were remembered. As soon as the question was out of her mouth, though, Liandrin realized she had made a mistake. It was a question guaranteed to cause doubt and anxiety coming from an Aes Sedai, but Amalisa's back stiffened and her face hardened. That is an insult, Liandrin Sedai. I am Shienaran, of a noble house and the blood of soldiers. My line has fought the shadow since before there was a Shienar, 3,000 years without fail or a day's weakness. Liandrin shifted her point of attack, but she did not retreat. Striding across the room, she took the leather-bound copy of The Dance of the Hawk and the Hummingbird from the mantelpiece and hefted it without looking at it. In Shienar above other lands, my daughter, the light must be precious, and the shadow feared. Casually, she threw the book into the fire. Flames leaped as if it were a log of fat wood, thundering as they licked up the chimney. In the same instant, every lamp in the room flared, hissing, so fiercely did they burn, flooding the chamber with light. Here above all, here so close to the cursed blight, where corruption waits. Here, even one who thinks he walks in the light may still be corrupted by the shadow. Beads of sweat glistened on Amalisa's forehead. The hand she had raised in protest for her book fell slowly to her side. Her features still held firm, but Liandrin saw her swallow and her feet shift. I do not understand, Liandrin Sedai. Is it the book? It is only foolishness. There was a faint quaver in her voice. Good. Glass lamp mantles cracked as flames leaped higher and hotter, lighting the room as bright as unsheltered noon. Amalisa stood stiff as a post, her face tight as she tried not to squint. It is you who are foolish, my daughter. I care nothing for books. Here men enter the blight and walk in its taint, in the very shadow. Why wonder you that that taint may seep into them? Whether or not against their will, still it may seep. Why think you the Amyrlin seat herself has come? No, it was a gasp. Of the red am I, my daughter, Liandrin said relentlessly. I hunt all men corrupted. I don't understand. Not only those foul ones who try the one power, all men corrupted. High and low do I hunt. I don't. Amalisa licked her lips unsteadily and made a visible effort to gather herself. I do not understand, Liandrin Sedai. Please, high even before low. No. As if some invisible support had vanished, Amalisa fell to her knees and her head dropped. Please, Liandrin Sedai, say you do not mean Agilmar. It cannot be him. In that moment of doubt and confusion, Liandrin struck. She did not move, but lashed out with the one power. Amalisa gasped and gave a jerk, as if she had been pricked with a needle, and Liandrin's petulant mouth perked in a smile. This was her own special trick from childhood, the first learned. It had been forbidden to her as soon as the Mistress of Novices discovered it, but to Liandrin that only meant one more thing she needed to conceal from those who were jealous of her. She strode forward and pulled Amalisa's chin up. The metal that had stiffened her was still there, but it was baser metal now, malleable to the right pressures. Tears trickled from the corners of Amalisa's eyes, glistening on her cheeks. Liandrin let the fires die back to normal. There was no longer any message. She softened her words, but her voice was as unyielding as steel. Daughter, no one wants to see you and Agelmar thrown to the people as dark friends. I will help you, but you must help. Help you? Amalisa put her hands to her temples. She looked confused. Please, Leandrin Sedai, I don't understand. It is all so... It's all... It was not a perfect ability. Leandrin could not force anyone to do what she wanted, though she had tried. Oh, how she had tried. But she could open them wide to her arguments, make them want to believe her, want more than anything to be convinced of her rightness. Obey, daughter. Obey and answer my questions truthfully, and I promise that no one will speak of you and Agomar as dark friends. You will not be dragged naked through the streets, to be flogged from the city if the people do not tear you to pieces first. I will not let this happen. You understand? Yes, Leandrin Sedai, yes. I will do as you say and answer you truly. Leandrin straightened, looking down at the other woman. The Lady Amalisa stayed as she was, kneeling, her face as open as a child waiting to be comforted and helped by someone wiser and stronger. There was a rightness about it to Leandrin. She had never understood why a simple bow or curtsy was sufficient for Aes Sedai when men and women knelt to kings and queens. What queen has within her my power? Her mouth twisted angrily, and Amalisa shivered. Be easy in yourself, my daughter. I have come to help you, not to punish. Only those who deserve it will be punished. Truth only speak to me. I will, Leandrin Sedai. I will. I swear it by my house and honor. Moiraine came to Fal Dara with a dark friend. Amalisa was too frightened to show surprise. Oh no, Leandrin Sedai, no. That man came later. He is in the dungeons now. Later, you say? But it is true that she speaks often with him? She is often in company with this dark friend? Alone? Sometimes, Leandrin Sedai. Only sometimes. She wishes to find out why he came here. Moiraine Sedai is... Leandrin held up her hand sharply, and Amalisa swallowed whatever else she had been going to say. By 3 young men Moiraine was accompanied. This I know. Where are they? I have been to their rooms, and they are not to be found. I do not know, Leandrin Sedai. They seem nice boys. Surely you don't think they are dark friends? Not dark friends, no. Worse. By far more dangerous than dark friends, my daughter. The entire world is in danger from them. They must be found. You will command your servants to search the keep, and your ladies, and yourself, every crack and cranny. To this you will see personally. Personally! And to no one will you speak of it save those I name. None else may know. None. From Fal Dara in secrecy these young men must be removed, and to Tar Valon taken. In utter secrecy. As you command, Leandrin Sedai. But I do not understand the need for secrecy. No one here will hinder Aes Sedai. Of the Black Ajah you have heard? Amalisa's eyes bulged, and she leaned back away from Leandrin, raising her hands as though to shield herself from a blow. A vile rumor, Leandrin Sedai. Vile. There are no Aes Sedai who serve the Dark One. I do not believe it. You must believe me. Under the light, I swear I do not believe it. By my honor and my house, I swear. Coolly, Leandrin let her go on, watching the last remaining strength leach out of the other woman with her own silence. Aes Sedai had been known to become angry, very angry, with those who mentioned the Black Ajah, not those who said they believed in its hidden existence. After this, with her will already weakened by that trick, Amalisa would be as clay in her hands. After one more blow. The Black Ajah is real, child. Real, and here within Fal Dara's walls. Amalisa knelt there, her mouth hanging open. The Black Ajah. Aes Sedai, who were also dark friends. Almost as horrible to learn the Dark One himself walked Fal Dara Keep. But Leandrin was any Aes Sedai path a Black Sister could be. I cannot tell you which they are, but my protection you can have, if in the light you walk and me obey. I will, Amalisa whispered hoarsely. I will. Please, Leandrin Sedai, please say you will protect my brother and my lady. Who deserves protection, I will protect. Concern yourself with yourself, my daughter, and think only of what I have commanded of you. Only that. The fate of the world rides on this, my daughter. All else you must forget. Yes, Leandrin, said I. Yes, yes. Leandrin turned and crossed the room, not looking back until she reached the door. Amalisa was still on her knees, still watching her anxiously. Rise, my lady Amalisa. Leandrin made her voice pleasant, with only a hint of mocking she felt. Sister, indeed. Not one day as a novice would she last, and power to command she has. Rise. Amalisa straightened in slow, stiff jerks, as if she'd been bound hand and foot for hours. As she finally came upright, Leandrin said, the steel back in full strength, "And if you fail the world, if you fail me, that wretched dark friend in the dungeon will be your envy." From the look on Amalisa's face, Leandrin did not think failure would come from any lack of effort on her part. Pulling the door shut behind her, Leandrin suddenly felt a prickling across her skin. Breath catching, she whirled about, looking up and down the dimly lit hall. Empty. It was full night beyond the arrow slits. The hall was empty, yet she was sure there had been eyes on her. The vacant corridor, shadowy between the lamps on the walls, mocked her. She shrugged uneasily, then started down the hall determinedly. Fancies take me, nothing more. Full night already, and there was much to do before dawn. Her orders had been explicit.
Pitch blackness covered the dungeons, whatever the hour, unless someone brought in a lantern. But Padan Fain sat on the edge of his cot, staring into the dark with a smile on his face. He could hear the other two prisoners grumbling in their sleep, muttering in nightmares. Padan Fain was waiting for something. Something he had been waiting for a long time. For too long, but not much longer. The door to the outer guard room opened, spilling in a flood of light, darkly outlining a figure in the doorway. Fain stood. You, not who I expected. He stretched with a casualness he did not feel. Blood raced through his veins. He thought he could leap over the keep if he tried. Surprises for everyone, eh? Well, come on. The night's getting old, and I want some sleep sometime. As a lamp came into the cell chamber, Fain raised his head, grinning at something unseen yet felt, beyond the dungeon's stone ceiling. It isn't over yet, he whispered. The battle's never over. Chapter 6. Dark Prophecy. The farmhouse door shook under furious blows from outside. The heavy bar across the door jumped in its brackets. Beyond the window next to the door moved the heavy-muzzled silhouette of a Trolloc. There were windows everywhere, and more shadowy shapes outside. Not shadowy enough, though. Rand could still make them out. The windows, he thought desperately. He backed away from the door, clutching his sword before him in both hands. Even if the door holds, they can break in the windows. Why aren't they trying the windows? With a deafening metallic screech, one of the brackets pulled the door frame, hanging loose on nails ripped a finger's width out of the wood. The bar quivered from another blow, and the nails squealed again. We have to stop them, Rand shouted. Only we can't. We can't stop them. He looked around for a way to run, but there was only the one door. The room was a box. Only one door and so many windows. We have to do something. Something. It's too late, Matt said. Don't you understand? His grin looked odd on a bloodless, pale face, and the hilt of a dagger stood out from his chest, the ruby that capped it blazing as if it held fire. The gem had more life than his face. It's too late for us to change anything. I've finally gotten rid of them, Baron said, laughing. Blood streamed down his face like a flood of tears from his empty sockets. He held out red hands, trying to make Rand look at what he held. I'm free now. It's over. It's never over, Althor, Padan Fain cried, capering in the middle of the floor. The battle's never done. The door exploded in splinters, and Rand ducked away from the flying shards of wood. 2 red-clad Aes Sedai bowing their master in. A mask the color of dried blood covered Baalzamon's face, but Rand could see the flames of his eyes through the eye slits. He could hear the roaring fires of Baalzamon's mouth. "It is not yet done between us, Althor," Baalzamon said, and he and Fane spoke together as one. "For you, the battle is never done." With a strangled gasp, Rand sat up on the floor, clawing his way awake. It seemed he could still hear Fane's voice, as sharp as if the peddler were standing beside him. "It's never over. The battle's never done." Bleary-eyed, he looked around to convince himself that he was still hidden away where Egwene had left him, bedded down on a pallet in a corner of her room. The dim light of a single lamp suffused the room, and he was surprised to see Nynaeve knitting in a rocking chair on the other side of the lone bed, its covers. It was night outside. Dark-eyed and slender, Nynaeve wore her hair in a fat braid, pulled over one shoulder and hanging almost to her waist. She had not given up on home. Her face was calm, and she seemed aware of nothing except her knitting as she rocked gently. The steady click-click of her knitting needles was the only sound. The rug silenced the rocking chair. There had been nights of late when he had wished for a carpet on the cold stone floor of his room, but in Shinar, men's rooms were always bare and stark. The walls here had 2 tapestries, mountain scenes with waterfalls, and flower-embroidered curtains alongside the arrow slits. Cut flowers, white morning stars, stood in a flat, round vase on the table by the bed, and more knotted and glazed white sconces on the walls. A tall mirror stood in a corner, and another hung over the washstand, with its blue-striped pitcher and bowl. He wondered why Egwene needed 2 mirrors. There was none in his room, and he did not miss it. There was only 1 lamp lit, but 4 more stood around the room, which was nearly as large as the one he shared with Mat and Perrin. Egwene had it alone. Without looking up, Nynaeve said, "If you sleep in the afternoon, you can't expect to sleep at night." He frowned, though she could not see it. At least, he thought she could not. She was only a few years older than he, but being wisdom added 50 years of authority. "I needed a place to hide and I was tired," he said, then quickly added, "I didn't just come here. Egwene invited me into the women's apartments." Nynaeve lowered her knitting and gave him an amused smile. She was a pretty woman. That was something he would never have noticed back home. One just did not think of a wisdom that way. "The light helped me, Rand. You are becoming more Shinaran every day." "Invited into the women's apartments, indeed." She sniffed. "Any day now you'll start talking about your honor and asking peace to favor your sword." He colored and hoped she did not notice in the dim light. She eyed his sword, its hilt sticking out of the long bundle beside him on the floor. He knew she did not approve of the sword, of any sword, but she said nothing about it for once. "Egwene told me why you need a place to hide. Don't worry, we'll keep you hidden from the Amyrlin, or from any other Aes Sedai, if that is what you want." She met his eyes and jerked hers away, but not before he saw her uneasiness, her doubt. "That's right, I can channel the power. A man wielding the one power. You ought to be helping the Aes Sedai hunt me down and gentle me." Scowling, he straightened the leather jerkin Egwene had found for him and twisted around so he could lean back against the wall. "As soon as I can, I will hide in a cart or sneak out. You won't have to hide me long." Nynaeve did not say anything. She fixed on her knitting, making an angry sound when she dropped a stitch. "Where's Egwene?" She let the knitting fall onto her lap. "I don't know why I am even trying tonight. I can't keep track of my stitches for some reason. She has gone down to see Padan Fain. She thinks seeing faces he knows might help him. Mine certainly did not. She ought to stay away from him. He's dangerous." "She wants to help him," Nynaeve said calmly. "Remember, she was training to be my assistant. Wisdom is not all predicting the weather. Healing is part of it, too. Egwene has the desire to heal, the need to. And if Padan Fain is so dangerous, Moiraine would have said something. She barked a laugh. You didn't ask her. Egwene admitted it, and I can just see you asking permission for anything. Her raised eyebrow wiped the laugh off his face. He refused to apologize. They were a long way from home, and he did not see how she could go on being Wisdom of Emond's Field if she was going to Tar Valon. Have they started to search for me yet? Egwene is not sure they will, but Lance says the Amyrlin seed is here because of me, and I think I'll take his opinion over hers. For a moment, Nynaeve did not answer. Instead, she fussed with her skeins of yarn. Finally, she said, I am not sure. One of the serving women came a little while ago to turn down the bed, she said, as if Egwene would be going to sleep already with the feast for the Amyrlin tonight. I sent her away. She didn't see you. Nobody turns your bed down for you in the men's quarters. She gave him a level look, one that would have set him stammering a year ago. He shook his head. They wouldn't use the maids to look for me, Nynaeve. When I went to the buttery for a cup of milk earlier, there were too many women in the halls. Those who are attending the feast should have been getting dressed, and the others should either have been helping them or getting ready to serve. Or to... She frowned worriedly. There's more than enough work for everybody with the Amyrlin here. And they were not just here in the women's apartments. I saw the Lady Amalisa herself coming out of a storeroom near the buttery with her face all over dust. That's ridiculous. Why would she be a part of a search? Or any of the women, for that matter. They'd be using Lord Agelmar's soldiers, and the warders, and the Aes Sedai. They must just be doing something for the feast. Burn me if I know what a Shienaran feast takes. You are a woolhead sometimes, Rand. The men I saw didn't know what the women were doing either. I heard some of them complaining about having to do all the work by themselves. I know it makes no sense that they were looking for you. None of the Aes Sedai seemed to be taking any interest. But Amalisa was not readying herself for the feast by dirtying her dress in a storeroom. They were looking for something important. Even if she began right after I saw her, she would barely have time to bathe and change. Speaking of which, if Egwene doesn't come back soon, she'll have to choose between changing and being late. For the first time, he realized that Nynaeve was not wearing the Two Rivers woolens he was used to. Her dress was pale blue silk, embroidered in snowdrop blossoms around the neck and down the sleeves. Each blossom centered on a small pearl, and her belt was tooled in silver with a silver buckle set with pearls. He had never seen her in anything like that. Even feast day clothes back home might not match it. You're going to the feast? Of course. Even if Moiraine had not said I should, I would never let her think I was... Her eyes lit up fiercely for a moment, and he knew what she meant. Nynaeve would never let anyone think she was afraid, even if she was. Certainly not Moiraine, and especially not Lance. He hoped she did not know he was aware of her feelings for the warder. After a moment, her gaze softened as it fell on the sleeve of her dress. The Lady Amalisa gave me this, she said so softly he wondered if she was speaking to herself. She stroked the silk with her fingers, outlining the embroidered flowers, smiling, lost in thought. It's very pretty on you, Nynaeve. You're pretty tonight. He winced as soon as he said it. Any wisdom was touchy about her affairs, and he was touchier than most. The women's circle back home had always looked over her shoulder because she was young, and maybe because she was pretty, and her fights with the mayor and the village council had been the stuff of stories. She jerked her hand away from the embroidery and looked at him, brows lowering. He spoke quickly to forestall her. They can't keep the gates barred forever. Once they are opened, I will be gone, and the Aes Sedai will never find me. This is in the Black Hills and the Carlane grass. You can go for days without seeing a soul. Maybe I can figure out what to do about it. He shrugged uncomfortably. There was no need to say it. And if I can't, there'll be no one to hurt. Nynaeve was silent for a moment. Slowly. I am not so sure, Rand. I can't say you look like more than another village boy to me, but Moiraine insists you are ta'veren. And I don't think she believes the wheel is finished with you. The Dark One seems... Shaitan is dead, he said harshly. Abruptly, the room seemed to lurch. He grabbed his head as waves of dizziness swept through him. You fool! You pure, blind, idiotic fool! Naming the Dark One? Bringing his attention down on you? Don't you have enough trouble? He's dead, Rand muttered, rubbing his head. He swallowed. The dizziness was already fading. All right. Baalzamon if you want, but he's dead. I saw him die, saw him burn. And I wasn't watching you when the Dark One's eye fell on you just now. Don't tell me you felt nothing, or I'll box your ears. I saw your face. He's dead, Rand insisted. The unseen watcher flashed through his head, and the wind in the tower top. He shivered. Strange things happen this close to the Blight. You are a fool, Rand al'Thor. She shook a fist at him. I'd box your ears for you if I thought it would knock any sense. The rest of her words were swallowed as bells crashed out, ringing all over the keep. He bounded to his feet. That's an alarm. They're searching. Name the Dark One, and his evil comes down on you. Nynaeve stood more slowly, shaking her head uneasily. No, I don't think so. If they are searching for you, all the bells do is warn you. No, if it's an alarm, it is not for you. Then what? He hurried to the nearest arrow slit and peered out. Lights darted through the night-cloaked keep like fireflies, lamps and torches dashing here and there. Some went to the outer walls and towers, but most of those that he could see milled through the garden below and the one courtyard he could just glimpse part of. Whatever had caused the alarm was inside the keep. The bells fell silent, unmasking the shouts of men, but he could not make out what they were calling. If it isn't for me... Egwene, he said suddenly. If he's still alive, if there's any evil, it's supposed to come to me. Then he turned from looking to another. What? Egwene! He crossed the room in quick strides and snatched his sword and scabbard free of the bundle. Light, it's supposed to hurt me, not her. She's in the dungeon with Thane. What if he's loose somehow? She caught him at the door, grabbing his arm. She was not as tall as his shoulder, but she held on like iron. Don't be a worse goat-brained fool than you've already been, Rand al'Thor. The women are looking for something. Blightman, this is the women's apartments. There will be Aes Sedai there as likely as not. It'll be all right. She was going to take Mat and Perrin with her. Even if she met trouble, they would look after her. What if she couldn't find them, Nynaeve? Egwene would never let that stop her. She would go alone, the same as you, and you know it. Light, I told her Thane is dangerous. Burn me, I told her. Pulling free, he jerked open the door and dashed out. Light, burn me. It's supposed to hurt me. A woman screamed at the side of him, in a laborer's coarse shirt and jerkin with a sword in his hand. Even invited men did not go armed in the women's apartments unless the keep was under attack. Women filled the corridor, serving women in the black and gold, ladies of the keep in silks and laces, women in embroidered shawls with long fringes, all talking loudly at the same time, all demanding to know what was happening. Crying children clung to skirts everywhere. He plunged through them, dodging where he could, muttering apologies to those he shouldered aside, trying to ignore their startled stares. One of the women in a shawl turned to go back into her room, and he saw the back of her shawl, saw the gleaming white teardrop in the middle of her back. Suddenly he recognized faces he had seen in the outer courtyard. Aes Sedai staring at him in alarm now. Who are you? What are you doing here? Is the keep under attack? Answer me, man. He's no soldier. Who is he? What's happening? It's the young Southland Lord. Someone stop him. Fear pushed his lips back, baring his teeth, but he kept moving and tried to move faster. Then a woman came out into the hall, face to face with him, and he stopped in spite of himself. He recognized that face above the rest. He thought he would remember it if he lived forever. The Amyrlin seat. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, and she started back. Another Aes Sedai, the tall woman he had seen with the staff, put herself between him and the Amyrlin, shouting something at him that he could not make out over the increasing babble. Light, help me, she knows. Moiraine told her. Snarling, he ran on. Light, just let me make sure Egwene's safe before they... He heard shouting behind him, but he did not listen. There was enough turmoil around him out in the keep. Men running for the courtyards with swords in hand, never looking at him. Over the clamor of alarm bells, he could make out other noises now. Shouts, screams, metal ringing on metal. He had just time to realize that they were the sounds of battle. Fighting? Inside Valdara? When 3 Trollocs came dashing around a corner in front of him. Hairy snouts distorted otherwise human faces, and one of them had ram's horns. They bared teeth, raising scythe-like swords as they sped toward him. The hallway that had been full of running men a moment before was empty now, except for the 3 Trollocs and himself. Caught by surprise, he unsheathed his sword awkwardly, tried hummingbird kisses the honey rose. Shaken at finding Trollocs in the heart of Valdara Keep, he did the form so badly, Lan would have stalked off in disgust. A bare-snouted Trolloc evaded it easily, bumping the other 2 off stride for just an instant. Suddenly, there were a dozen Shinarans rushing past him at the Trollocs, men half-dressed in finery for the feast, but swords at the ready. The bare-snouted Trolloc snarled as it died, and its companion pursued by shouting men waving steel. Shouts and screams filled the air from everywhere. Egwene! Rand turned deeper into the keep, running down halls empty of life, though now and again a dead Trolloc lay on the floor, or a dead man. Then he came to a crossing of corridors, and to his left was the tail end of a fight. 6 top-knotted men lay bleeding and still, and a 7th was dying. The Myrddraal gave its sword an extra twist as it pulled the blade free of the man's belly, and the soldier screamed as he dropped his sword and fell. The Thade moved with viperous grace, the serpent illusion heightened by the armor of black overlapping plates that covered its chest. It turned, and that pale, eyeless face studied Rand. It started toward him, smiling a bloodless smile, not hurrying. It had no need to hurry for one man alone. He felt rooted where he stood, his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. The look of the eyeless is fear. That was what they said along the border. His hands shook as he raised his sword. He never even thought of assuming the void. Light had just killed 7 armed soldiers together. Light, what am I going to do? Light! Abruptly, the Myrddraal stopped, its smile gone. This one is mine, Rand. Rand gave a start as Ingtar stepped up beside him, dark and stocky in a yellow feast-day coat, sword held in both hands. Ingtar's dark eyes never left the Thade's face. If the Shinaran felt the fear of that gaze, he gave no sign. Try yourself on a Trolloc or 2, he said softly, before you face one of these. I was coming down to see if Egwene is safe. She was going to the dungeon to visit Fane, and... Then go see to her. Rand swallowed. We'll take it together, Ingtar. You aren't ready for this. Go see to your girl. Go! You want Trollocs to find her unprotected? For a moment, Rand hung there, undecided. The Fade had raised its sword for Ingtar. A silent snarl twisted Ingtar's mouth, but Rand knew it was not fear. And Egwene could be alone in the dungeon with Fane, or worse. Still, he felt ashamed as he ran for the stairs that led underground. He knew a Fade's look could make any man afraid, but Ingtar had conquered the dread. His stomach still felt knotted. The corridors beneath the keep were silent and feebly lit by flickering, far-spaced lamps on the walls. He slowed as he came closer to the dungeons, creeping as silently as he could on his toes. The grate of his boots on the bare stone seemed to fill his ears. The door to the dungeons stood cracked open a handbreadth. It should have been closed and bolted. Staring at the door, he tried to swallow and could not. He opened his mouth to call out, then shut it again quickly. If Egwene was in there and in trouble, shouting would only warn whoever was endangering her. Or whatever. Taking a deep breath, he set himself. In one motion, he pushed the door wide open with the scabbard in his left hand and threw himself into the dungeon, tucking his shoulder under to roll through the straw covering the floor and come to his feet, spinning this way and that too quickly to get a clear picture of the room, looking desperately for anyone who might attack him, looking for Egwene. There was no one there. His eyes fell on the table, and he stopped dead. Breath and even thought freezing. On either side of the still-burning lamp, as if to make a centerpiece, sat the heads of the guards in 2 pools of blood. Their eyes stared at him, wide with fear, and their mouths gaped in a last scream no one could hear. Rand gagged and doubled over. His stomach heaved again and again as he vomited into the straw. Finally, he managed to pull it out, scrubbing his mouth with his sleeve. His throat felt scraped raw. Slowly he became aware of the rest of the room, only half seen and not taken in during his hasty search for an attacker. Bloody lumps of flesh lay scattered through the straw. There was nothing he could recognize as human except the two heads. Some of the pieces looked chewed. That's what happened to him.
1 second, everyone.
He was surprised at the calmness of his thoughts, almost as if he had achieved the void without trying. It was the shock, he knew vaguely. He did not recognize either of the heads. The guards had been changed since he was there earlier. He was glad for that. Knowing who they were, even Chang'u would have made it worse. Blood covered the walls, too, but in scrawled letters, single words and whole sentences splashed on every which way. Some were harsh and angular, in a language he did not know, though he recognized Trolloc script. Others he could read, and wished he could not. Blasphemies and obscenities bad enough to make a stable hand or a merchant's guard go pale. Egwene! Calmness vanished. Shoving his scabbard through his belt, he snatched the lamp from the table, hardly noticing when the heads toppled over. Egwene! Where are you? He started toward the inner door, took 2 steps, and stopped, staring. The words on the door, dark and glistening wetly in the light of his lamp, were plain enough. We will meet again on Toman Head. It is never over, al'Thor. His sword dropped from a hand suddenly numb. Never taking his eyes off the door, he bent to pick it up. Instead, he grabbed a handful of straw and began scrubbing furiously at the words on the door. Panting, he scrubbed until it was all one bloody smear, but he could not stop. What do you do? At the sharp voice behind him, he whirled, stooping to seize his sword. A woman stood in the outer doorway, back stiff with outrage. Her hair was like pale gold in a dozen or more braids, but her eyes were dark and sharp on his face. She looked not much older than he, and pretty in a sulky way, but there was a tightness to her mouth he did not like. Then he saw the shawl she had wrapped tightly around her, with its long red fringe. Aes Sedai, and light help me, she's Red Ajah. I was just... It's filthy stuff, vile. Everything must be left exactly as it is for us to examine. Touch nothing. She took a step forward, peering at him, and he took one back. Yes, as I thought. One of those with Moraine. What do you have to do with this? Her gesture took in the heads on the table and the bloody scroll on the walls. For a minute he goggled at her. Me? Nothing. I came down here to find... Egwene! He turned to open the inner door, and the Aes Sedai shouted, No! You will answer me! Suddenly, it was all he could do to stand up, to keep holding the lamp and his sword. Icy cold squeezed at him from all sides. He felt his head caught in a frozen vice. He could barely breathe for the pressure on his chest. Answer me, boy. Tell me your name. Involuntarily, he grunted, trying to answer against the chill that seemed to be pressing his face back into his skull, constricting his chest like frozen iron bands. He clenched his jaws to keep the sound in. Painfully, he rolled his eyes to glare at her through a blur of tears. The light burn you, Aes Sedai. I won't say a word. The shadow take you. Answer me, boy. Now! Frozen needles pierced his brain with agony, grated into his bones. The void formed inside him before he even realized he had thought of it. But it could not hold out the pain. Dimly, he sensed light and warmth somewhere in the distance. It flickered queasily, but the light was warm, and he was cold. Distant beyond knowing, but somehow just within reach. Light so cold, I have to reach. What? She's killing me. I have to reach it, or she'll kill me. Desperately, he stretched toward the light. What is going on here? Abruptly, the cold and the pressure and the needles vanished. His knees sagged, but he forced them stiff. He would not fall to his knees. He would not give her the satisfaction. The void was gone, too, as suddenly as it had come. She was trying to kill me. Panting, he raised his head. Moraine stood in the doorway. I asked, what is going on here, Liandrin? She said. I found this boy here, the Red Aes Sedai replied calmly. The guards are murdered, and here he is. One of yours. And what are you doing here, Moraine? The battle is above, not here. I could ask the same of you, Leandrin. Moraine looked around the room with only a slight tightening of her mouth for the charnel. Why are you here? Rand turned away from them awkwardly, shoved back the bolts on the inner door, and pulled it open. Egwene came down here, he announced for anyone who cared, and went in, holding his lamp high. His knees kept wanting to give way. He was not sure how he stayed on his feet, only that he had to find Egwene. Egwene! A hollow gurgle and a thrashing sound came from his right, and he thrust the lamp that way. The prisoner in the fancy coat was sagging against the iron grill of his cell, his belt looped around the bars, and then around his neck. He gave one last kick, scraping across the straw-covered floor, and was still, tongue and eyes bulging out of a face gone almost black. His knees almost touched the floor. He could have stood any time he wanted to. Shivering, Rand peered into the next cell. The big man, with the sunken knuckles, huddled in the back of his cell, eyes as wide as they could open. At the sight of Rand, he screamed and twisted around, clawing frantically at the stone wall. I won't hurt you, Rand called. The man kept on screaming and digging. His hands were bloody, and his scrabblings streaked across dark, congealed smears. This was not his first attempt to dig through the stone with his bare hands. Rand turned away, relieved that his stomach was already empty, but there was nothing he could do for either of them. Egwene! His light finally reached the end of the cells. Egwene's cell stood open, and the cell was empty, but it was the two shapes on the stone in front of the cell that made Rand leap forward and drop to his knees between them. Egwene and Mat lay sprawled, bonelessly, unconscious, or dead. With a flood of relief, he saw their chests rise and fall. There did not seem to be a mark on either of them. Egwene? Mat? Setting the sword down, he shook Egwene gently. Egwene. She did not open her eyes. Moraine! Egwene's hurt! And Mat! Mat's breathing sounded labored, and his face was deathly pale. Rand felt almost like crying. It was supposed to hurt me. I named the Dark One me. Do not move, then. Moraine did not sound upset or even surprised. The chamber was suddenly flooded with light as the two Aes Sedai entered. Each balanced a glowing ball of cool light floating in the air above her hand. Liandrin marched straight down the middle of the wide hall, holding her skirts up out of the straw with her free hand, but Moraine paused to look at the two prisoners before following. There is nothing to do for the one, she said, and the other can wait. Liandrin reached Rand first and began to bend toward Egwene, but Moraine darted in ahead of her and laid her free hand on Egwene's head. Liandrin straightened with a grimace. She is not badly hurt, Moraine said after a moment. She was struck here. She traced an area on the side of Egwene's head, covered by her hair. Rand could see nothing different about it. That is the only injury she has taken. She will be all right. Rand looked from one Aes Sedai to the other. What about Mat? Liandrin arched an eyebrow at him and turned to watch Moraine with a wry expression. Be quiet, Moraine said. Fingers still lying on the area where she said Egwene had been hit, she closed her eyes. Egwene murmured and stirred, then lay still. Is she? She is sleeping, Rand. She will be well, but she must sleep. Moraine Mat, but here she only touched him for a moment before drawing back. This is more serious, she said softly. She fumbled at Mat's wrist, pulling his coat open, and made an angry sound. The dagger is gone. What dagger? Liandrin asked. Voices suddenly came from the outer room, men exclaiming in disgust and anger. In here, Moraine called. Bring 2 litters, quickly. Someone in the outer room raised a cry for litters. Thane is gone, Rand said. The two Aes Sedai looked at him. He could read nothing on their faces. Their eyes glittered in the light. So I see, Moraine said in a flat voice. I told her not to come. I told her he was dangerous. When I came, Liandrin said in a cold voice, he was destroying the writing in the outer chamber. He shifted uneasily on his knees. The Aes Sedai's eyes seemed alike now. Measuring and weighing him, cool and terrible. It was filth, he said. Just filth. They still looked at him, not speaking. You don't think Moraine, you can't think I had anything to do with what happened out there. Like, did I? I named the Dark One. She did not answer, and he felt a chill that was not lessened by men rushing in with torches and lamps. Moraine and Leandrin let their glowing balls wink out. The lamps and torches did not give as much light. Shadows sprang up in the depths of the cells. Men with litters hurried to the figures lying on the floor. Ingtar led them. His topknot almost quivered with anger, and he looked eager to find something on which to use his sword. So the Dark Friend is gone too, he growled. Well, it's the least of what has happened this night. The least even here, Moraine said sharply. She directed the men putting Egwene and Mat on the litters. The girl is to be taken to her room. She needs a woman to watch in case she wakes in the night. She may be frightened, but more than anything else, she needs sleep now. The boy... She touched Mat as two men lifted his litter and pulled her hand back quickly. Take him to the Amyrlin Seats chambers. Find the Amyrlin wherever she is, and tell her he is there. Tell her his name is Matrim Cawthon. I will join her as soon as I am able. The Amyrlin? Leandrin exclaimed. You think to have the Amyrlin as healer for your pet? You are mad, Moraine. The Amyrlin Seat, Moraine said calmly, does not share your Red Ajah prejudices, Leandrin. She will heal a man without need of a special use. Go ahead, she told the litter bearers. Leandrin watched them leave, Moraine and the men carrying Mat and Egwene, then turned to stare at Rand. He tried to ignore her. He concentrated on scabbarding his sword and brushing off the straw that clung to his shirt and breeches. When he raised his head, though, she was still studying him, her face as blank as ice. Saying nothing, she turned to consider the other men thoughtfully. One held the body of the hanged man up, while another worked to unfasten the belt. Ingtar and the others waited respectfully. With a last glance at Rand, she left, head held like a queen. A hard woman, Ingtar muttered, then seemed surprised that he had spoken. What happened here, Rand al'Thor? Rand shook his head. I don't know, except that Fane escaped somehow. I heard Egwene and Mat doing it. I saw the guard room. He shuddered. But in here, whatever it was, Ingtar, it scared that fellow bad enough that he hung himself. I think the other one's gone mad from seeing it. We're all going mad tonight. The Fade, you killed it? No. Ingtar slammed his sword into its sheath. The hilt stuck up above his right shoulder. He seemed angry and ashamed at the same time. It's out of the keep by now, along with the rest of what we could not kill. At least you're alive, Ingtar. That Fade killed 7 men. Alive? Is that so important? Suddenly, Ingtar's face was no longer angry, but tired and full of pain. We had it in our hands. In our hands, and we lost it, Rand. Lost it! He sounded as if he could not believe what he was saying. Lost what? Rand asked. The horn. The Horn of Valere. It's gone, chest and all. But it was in the strong room. The strong room was looted, Ingtar said wearily. They did not take much, except for the horn, what they could stuff in their pockets. I wish they had taken everything else and left that. Ronan is dead, and the watchman he had guarding the strong room. His voice became quiet. When I was a boy, Ronan held Jahan Tower with 20 men against 1,000 Trollocs. He did not go down easily, though. The old man had blood on his dagger. No man can ask more than that. He was silent for a moment. They came in through the dog gate and left the same way. We put an end to 50 or more, but too many escaped. Trollocs. We've never before had Trollocs inside the keep. Never. How could they get in through the dog gate, Ingtar? One man could stop 100 there. And all the gates were barred. He shifted uneasily, remembering why. The guards would not have opened it to let anybody in. Their throats were cut, Ingtar said. Both good men, and yet they were butchered like pigs. It was done from inside. Someone killed them, then opened the gate. Someone who could get close to them without suspicion. Someone they knew. Rand looked at the empty cell where Padan Fain had been. But that means... Yes, there are dark friends inside Fal Dara. Or were. We will soon know if that's the case. Kajin is checking now to see if anyone is missing. Peace. Treachery in Fal Dara Keep. Scowling, he looked around the dungeon at the men waiting for him. They all had swords, one over feast day clothes, and some had helmets. We aren't doing any good here. Out, everyone! Rand joined the withdrawal. Ingtar tapped Rand's jerkin. What is this? Have you decided to become a stableman? It's a long story, Rand said. Too long to tell here. Maybe some other time. Maybe never if I'm lucky. Maybe I can escape in all this confusion. No, I can't. Not until I know Egwene's all right. Like, what will happen to him without the dagger? I suppose Lord Agelmar's doubled the guard on all the gates. Tripled, Ingtar said in tones of satisfaction. No one will pass those gates from inside or out. As soon as Lord Agelmar heard what had happened, he ordered that no one was to be allowed to leave the keep without his personal permission. As soon as he heard. Ingtar, what about before? What about the earlier order keeping everyone in? Earlier order? What earlier order? Rand, the keep was not closed until Lord Agelmar heard of this. Someone told you wrong. Rand shook his head slowly. Neither Ragan nor Tima would have made up something like that. And even if the Amyrlin Seat had given the order, Ingtar would have to know of it. So who and how? He glanced sideways at Ingtar, wondering if the Shienaran was lying. You really are going mad if you suspect Ingtar. They were in the dungeon guard room now. The severed heads and the pieces of the guards had been removed, though there were still red smears in the table and damp patches in the straw to show where they had been. 2 Aes Sedai were there, placid-looking women with brown-fringed shawls studying the words scrawled on the walls, careless of what their skirts dragged through in the straw. Each had an inkpot in a writing case hung at her belt and was making notes in a small book with a pen. They never even glanced at the men trooping through. Look here, Baron, one of them said, pointing to a section of stone covered with lines of Trolloc script. This looks interesting. The other hurried over, picking up reddish stains on her skirt. Yes, I see. A much better hand than the rest. Not a Trolloc. Very interesting. She began writing in her book, looking up every so often to read the angular letters on the wall. Rand hurried out. Even if they had not been Aes Sedai, he would not have wanted to remain in the same room with anyone who thought reading Trolloc script written in human blood was interesting. Ingtar and his men stalked on ahead, intent on their duties. Rand dawdled, wondering where he could go now. Getting back into the women's apartments would not be easy without Egwene to help. Light let her be all right. Moiraine said she'd be all right. Lan found him before he reached the first stairs leading up. You can go back to your room if you want, sheepherder. Moiraine had your things fetched from Egwene's room and taken to yours. How did she know? Moiraine knows a great many things, sheepherder. You should understand that by now. You had better watch yourself. The women are all talking about you staring down the Amyrlin, waving a sword. So they say. Light. I am sorry they're angry, Lan, but I was invited in. And when I heard the alarm... Burn me. Egwene was down here. Lan pursed his lips thoughtfully. It was the only expression on his face. Oh, they're not angry, exactly. Though most of them think you need a strong hand to settle you down some. Fascinated is more like it. Even the Lady Amalisa can't stop asking questions about you. Some of them are starting to believe the servants' tales. They think you're a prince in disguise, sheepherder. Not a bad thing. There's an old saying here in the Borderlands. Better to have 1 woman on your side than 10 men. The way they are talking among themselves, they're trying to decide whose daughter is strong enough to handle you. If you don't watch your step, sheepherder, you will find yourself married into a Shienaran house before you realize what has happened. Suddenly he burst out laughing. It looked odd, like a rock laughing. Running through the halls of the women's apartments in the middle of the night wearing a laborer's jerkin and waving a sword. If they don't have you flogged at the very least, they'll talk about you for years. They've never seen a male as peculiar as you. Whatever wife they chose for you, she'd probably have you the head of your own house in 10 years, and have you thinking you had done it yourself besides. It is too bad you have to leave. Rand had been gaping at the water, but now he growled. I have been trying. The gates were guarded and no one can leave. I tried while it was still daylight. I couldn't even take Red out of the stable. No matter now. Moraine sent me to tell you. You can leave any time you want to, even right now. Moraine had Agomar exempt you from the order. Why now and not earlier? Why couldn't I leave before? Was she the one who had the gates barred then? Ingtar said he knew nothing about any order to keep people in before tonight. Rand thought the water looked troubled, but all he said was, when someone gives you a horse, sheepherder, don't complain that it isn't as fast as you'd like. What about Egwene and Mat? Are they really all right? I can't leave until I know they're all right. The girl is fine. She'll wake in the morning and probably not even remember what happened. Blows to the head are like that. What about Mat? The choice is up to you, sheepherder. You can leave now, or tomorrow, or next week. It's up to you. He walked away, leaving Rand standing there in the corridor deep under Faldara Keep.
Chapter 7. Blood Calls Blood. As the litter-carrying Mat left the Amerlin seat's chambers, Moiraine carefully rewrapped the Angreal, a small, age-darkened ivory carving of a woman in flowing robes, in a square of silk, and put it back into her pouch. Working together with the other Aes Sedai, merging their abilities, channeling the flow of the one power to a single task, was tiring work under the best conditions, even with the aid of an Angreal. And working through the night without sleep was not the best conditions. And the work they had done on the boy had not been easy. Lyanna directed the litter-bearers out with sharp gestures and a few crisp words. The two
Hey,
men
Christopher,
kept
how you
their
doing?
heads, nervous at being around
Hope
so
you're
many
doing
Aes
well.
Sedai at once, and one of them, the Amerlin herself. Never mind that the Aes Sedai had been using the power. They had waited in the corridor, squatting against the wall while the work was done, and they were anxious to be gone from the women's apartments. Mat lay with his eyes closed and his face pale, but his chest rose and fell in the even rhythm of a deep sleep. How will this affect matters? Moiraine wondered. He is not necessary with the horn gone, and yet... The door closed behind Lyanna and the litter-bearers, and the Amerlin drew an unsteady breath. A nasty business, that. Nasty. Her face was smooth, but she rubbed her hands together as if she wanted to wash them.
Salut, Chris. J'espère que tu vas bien.
Wash them. But quite interesting, Varen said. She had been the fourth Aes Sedai the Amerlin had chosen for the work. It is too bad we do not have the dagger so the healing could be complete. For all we did tonight, he will not live long. Months, perhaps, at best. The three Aes Sedai were alone in the Amerlin's chambers. Beyond the arrow slits, dawn pearled the sky. But he will have those months now, Moiraine said sharply. And if it can be retrieved, the link can still be broken. If it can be retrieved.
Nice.
Yes, of course. It can still be broken, Varen agreed. She was a plump, square-faced woman, and even with the Aes Sedai gift of agelessness, there was a touch of gray in her brown hair. That was her only sign of age, but for an Aes Sedai it meant she was very old indeed. Her voice held steady, though, matching her smooth cheeks. He has been linked to the dagger a long time, however, as a thing like that must be reckoned, and he will be linked longer yet, whether it is found or not. He may already be changed beyond the reach of full healing, even if no longer enough to contaminate others. Such a small thing, that dagger, she mused, but it will corrupt whoever carries it long enough. He who carries it will in turn corrupt those who come in contact with him, and they will corrupt still others, and the hatred and suspicion that destroyed Shadar Logoth, every man and woman's hand turned against every other, will be loose in the world again. I wonder how many people it can taint in, say, a year. It should be possible to calculate a reasonable approximation. Moiraine gave the Brown sister a wry look. Another danger confronts us, and she sounds as if it is a puzzle in a book. Light, the Browns truly are not aware of the world at all. Then we must find the dagger, sister. Agelmar is sending men to hunt those who took the horn and slew his oath-men, the same who took the dagger. If one is found, the other will be. Verin nodded, but frowned at the same time. Yet, even if it is found, who can return it safely? Whoever touches it risks the taint if they handle it long. Perhaps in a chest, well wrapped and padded, but it would still be dangerous to those nearby for any great time. Without the dagger itself to study, we cannot be sure how much it must be shielded. But you saw it, and more, Moiraine. You dealt with it, enough for that young man to survive carrying it, and to stop him infecting others. You must have a good idea of how strong its influence is. There is one, Moiraine said, who can retrieve the dagger without being harmed by it. One whom we have shielded and buffered against that taint as much as anyone can be. Mat Cauthon. The Amyrlin nodded. Yes, of course. He can do it, if he lives long enough. The light only knows how far it will be carried before Agelmar's men find it, if they do find it, and if the boy dies first. Well, if the dagger is loose that long, we have another worry. She rubbed her eyes tiredly. I think we must find this Padan Fain, too. Why is this dark friend important enough for them to risk what they did to rescue him? Much easier for them just to steal the horn. Still risky as a winter gale in the Sea of Storms, coming into the very keep like that, but they compounded their risk to free this dark friend. If the Lurks think he is that important... She paused, and Moiraine knew she was wondering if it truly was still only the Myrddraal giving commands. Then so must we. He must be found, Moiraine agreed, hoping that none of the urgency she felt showed. But it is likely he will be found with the horn. As you say, daughter. The Amyrlin pressed fingers to her lips to stifle a yawn. And now, Verin, if you will excuse me, I will just say a few words to Moiraine and then sleep a little. I suppose Agelmar will insist on feasting tonight, since last night was spoiled. Your help was invaluable, daughter. Please remember, say nothing of the nature of the boy's hurt to anyone. There are some of your sisters who would see the shadow in him, instead of a thing men made on their own. There was no need to name the Red Ajah, and perhaps, Moiraine thought, the Reds were no longer the only ones of whom it was necessary to be wary. I will say nothing, of course, Mother. Verin bowed, but made no move toward the door. I thought you might wish to see this, Mother. She pulled a small notebook, bound in soft brown leather, from her belt. What was written on the walls in the dungeon? There were few problems with translation. Most was the usual, blasphemy and boasting. Trollocs seemed to know little else, but there was one part done in a better hand. An educated dark friend, or perhaps a Myrddraal. It could be only taunting, yet it has the form of poetry or song, and the sound of prophecy. We know little of prophecies from the Shadow, Mother.
Well, that's my
The Amyrlin hesitated
boy
only
right
a
there,
moment
too.
before nodding. Prophecies from the Shadow, dark prophecies, had an unfortunate way of being fulfilled as well as prophecies from the light. Read it to me. Verin ruffled through the pages, then cleared her throat and began in a calm, level voice. Daughter of the night, she walks again. The ancient war she yet fights. Her new lover she seeks, who shall serve her and die, yet serve still. Who shall stand against her coming? The shining walls shall kneel. Blood feeds blood. Blood calls blood. Blood is, and blood was, and blood shall ever be. The man who channels stands alone. He gives his friends for sacrifice. 2 roads before him, one to death beyond dying, one to life eternal. Which will he choose? Which will he choose? What hand shelters? What hand slays? Blood feeds blood. Blood calls blood. Blood is and blood was and blood shall ever be.
He's a good boy.
Luke
I got him
came
from
to the mountains of doom.
one of the local
Esam
shelters.
waited in the high passes. The hunt is now begun. The
Here's
Shadow's
a
hounds
puppy,
now
not even a
course
year
and
old.
kill. One did
And
live
now
and
he's
one
like,
did die, but both are. The time of
I think he's like
change
5
has
or
come.
6 now.
Blood
Something like
feeds
that.
blood.
Maybe a little
Blood
younger.
calls blood. Blood is and blood was and blood shall ever be. The
Yeah,
watchers wait on Toman's head.
Here's my
The
last
seed
pick
of the
too,
hammer
because
burns the ancient tree.
the other dogs I was
Death
trying
shall
to
sow
get,
and summer burn
but I go
before the
tell
great Lord comes.
because the way you do it
Death
here,
shall reap and bodies
at least at the
fail before
time,
the great Lord comes.
because they were
Again,
short
the
on
seed
employees,
slays ancient wrong before the
you would
great
have to
Lord
go
comes.
to the back
Now the great Lord
and look at the
comes.
different
Now
dogs.
the great Lord comes.
The one
Blood
you
feeds
see when you
blood.
like,
Blood
let them know
calls
up in the
blood.
front,
Blood
and
is
that
and
tell
blood
you
was and blood shall ever be.
yay or nay.
Now the great Lord comes.
And
There was a
the
long
first dog
silence when she
I
finished.
chose
Finally, the Amerlin said,
was a bull
"Who else
terrier,
has
like
seen
the
this
Spud
daughter?
McKenzie dog.
Who knows of it?"
And I went to let them
Only
know.
Sarah
They
found
said no,
Mother.
that he wasn't
As soon as we had
up for
copied it down,
adoption.
I had men
Then I
scrub
found
the
another
walls.
dog
They
that was a
didn't
cool
question.
one.
They were eager to be
And
rid
I
of
think
it.
he was
The Amerlin nodded.
I think a
Good.
pit
Too many in the
or a pit
borderlands can
mix,
puzzle
something like
out
that.
Trolloc script.
And they said
No
no.
need to give them something else to
And
worry
then I
over.
found
They
him.
have
It
enough.
was him.
What
And
do you
I'm
make of it?
assuming his
Moiraine
sister,
asked Verin in a careful
because
voice.
they're both the same
Is
breed,
it prophecy,
same
do you think?
age. Except
Verin
for
tilted her head,
he was this
peering at her
color,
notes in thought.
and his
Possibly.
sister is
It has
more
the form of some of the
the
few
brownish
dark
color
prophecies we know,
healer.
and parts
Because
of it are
he's
clear enough. It could still be
healer
only
and
a
shepherd,
taunt, though.
German shepherd
She
mix.
rested a finger on one line. Daughter
But
of the
when I
night,
went
she
up to the
walks again.
cage,
That can only mean
it
Lanfear
was
is loose
him and
again.
her,
Or someone wants us to think she is.
and he was the
That
only one
would
that pretty
be
much ran
something
up
to
to
worry
the
us, daughter,
fence
the
and jumped
Amerlin
up like
Seat
that
said,
with his tail
if it
wagging
were
and
true.
licking on my
But the
hand and
Forsaken are
whatnot.
still bound. She glanced at
And if they
Moiraine,
would have said no
looking
on
troubled
him, I
for an
was going
instant
to end up
before she
just
schooled her features.
leaving
Even
the
if the
shelter
seals
and saying
are
fuck it,
weakening,
and
the Forsaken are still bound.
probably coming back another day
Lanfear,
or week
in
or
the old
whenever,
tongue,
probably
Daughter
not.
of the Night. Nowhere
But
was
when
her
I
real
chose
name
him, they said,
recorded,
yeah, he's
but
available.
that was the name she had taken for
And I had to
herself,
pick him up the next
unlike
day
most of the
because
Forsaken who had been named
when
by
you get him
those
from
they
the shelter
betrayed.
here,
Some
I'm not
said
sure
she
if
had
it's
really
like that
been the
in
most powerful of the
every other
Forsaken,
shelter, but
next to Ishamael, the
I had to
betrayer
wait
of
for
hope,
him to
but had kept her powers hidden.
fix
Too
him
little
and
was
chip
left
him,
from
so he
that
got
time
clipped
for
and
any
chipped.
scholar to say for certain.
I had to pick him up the next day
With all
after
the false dragons that are
he had
appearing,
already came
it
out
is
of
not
the
surprising
surgery,
someone
like,
would try to bring
I guess
Lanfear
anesthetic
into
and
it.
all that.
Moiraine's voice was as unruffled as her
But I
face,
got him, and
but inside herself she roiled.
he's been
Only
my
one
boy
thing for
since.
certain was known of Lanfear beside the name. Before she went over to the Shadow, before Luz Theron
I
Telamon
just
met
wish they wouldn't have
Ilyena,
fixed him, because I got so
Lanfear
many
had been his
people
lover.
that
A
asked me if
complication we do not
they wanted
need.
him bred
The
with their
Amerlin
dog
Seat
just
frowned
because
as if she had had the same thought,
his color,
but Verin nodded as if it were all
and that
just
he's
words.
a blue healer
Other
and German
names are
shepherd
clear
mix.
too, Mother. Lord Luke, of course, was brother to Tigraine, then the daughter heir of Andor, and he vanished in the Blight. Who Isam is, or what he has to do with Luke, I do not know, however. We will find out what we need to know in time, Moiraine said smoothly. There is no proof as yet that this is prophecy. She knew the name. Isam had been the son of Brean, wife of Lane Mandragoran, whose attempt to seize the throne of Malkir for her husband had brought the Trolloc hordes crashing down. Brean and her infant son had both vanished when the Trollocs overran Malkir, and
Yeah,
Isam
but
had been blood
I guess
kin
you
to
could say they're
Lan,
all in the town
or
on the
is blood
spoiled
kin.
side.
I must keep this from him until I know how he will react,
But the smaller
until we
one I
are away
have,
from the Blight. If he
Tuffy,
thought
the little
Isam
white
were
one,
alive,
that's like
the
15 and a
Watchers
half.
wait on Toman Head.
I got
Verin
him
went
from
on.
my aunt
There
because
are a
she
few who
couldn't
still cling to the old
pretty
belief
much
that the
handle him
armies Arthur
anymore.
Hawkwing sent across the Arid
But she
Ocean will return
got
one day,
him from
though after
her
all this
boyfriend,
time, she gave a
and her
disdainful
boyfriend got him
sniff.
from
The
somewhere in
Domier
California.
Adron, the Watchers over the waves,
I
still
guess
have
she
a
spent
community is the
a
best
good little
word, I
amount of money
suppose,
on him.
on Toman Head at
But when he
Falmouth,
got him,
and one of
he
the
had no
old names
choice.
for
He actually
Arthur
got him.
Hawkwing was
He had to
Hammer of
get.
the
He
Light.
had to get
Are
him
you
fixed
suggesting, daughter, the Amerlin
because
Seed
his
said, that Arthur Hawkwing's
parents
armies,
were
or
show
rather their
dogs
descendants, might
because
actually
he's a
return after
full-blooded Shih
1,000
Tzu.
years?
But
There
since
are
his
rumors of
parents were
war
show
on Almuth
dogs,
Plain and Toman Head, Moiraine said
he had to
slowly.
have him.
And
He got him
Hawkwing sent
fixed.
2 of
Like
his
didn't have a
sons as
choice
well
and
as
whatnot
armies.
because
If they did
they
survive in
want
whatever lands they found, there
him to
could
use the
well be many
bloodline to profit
descendants of
from
Hawkwing, or none.
contaminate the
The
bloodline and
Amerlin gave Moiraine a guarded look,
make money off the
obviously
bloodline when it
wishing
wasn't
they
a
were
pure
alone,
bloodline.
so she could
It's
demand to
from
know what
what we were
Moiraine
told.
was up to. Moiraine made a soothing gesture, and her old friend grimaced at her.
But even him,
Varen, with her nose
he's
still
been my
buried
little
in her
buddy too
notes, noticed
since
none of it.
my aunt
I
got
don't
him.
know, Mother. I doubt it, though. We know nothing at all of those lands Arthur Hawkwing set out to conquer. It's too
I remember
bad the
telling
sea
her
folk
too that
refused to cross the Aryth Ocean.
after a while
They
if she
say
ever
the islands
decides
of
to
the
get rid
dead
of
lie
him
on the
or
other side.
doesn't
I
want
wish
him
I knew
to
what they
let me
meant
know
by
that I
that,
want him.
but that accursed
And
sea folk
first when she hit
close-mouthedness.
up,
She sighed, still not raising her head. All we have is one reference to lands under the shadow, beyond the setting sun, beyond the Aryth Ocean where the armies of night reign. Nothing there to tell us if the armies Hawkwing sent were enough by themselves to defeat these armies of the night, or even to survive Hawkwing's death. Once the War of the 100 Years started, everyone was too intent on carving out their own part of Hawkwing's empire to spare thought to his armies across the sea. It seems to me, Mother, that if their descendants still lived, and if they ever intended to return, they would not have waited so long. Then you believe it is not prophecy, daughter? Now, the ancient tree, Varen said, immersed in her own thoughts. There have always been rumors, no more than that while the nation of Almuth still lived, they had a branch of Avendasora, perhaps even a living sapling. And the banner of Almuth was blue for the sky above, black for the earth below, with the spreading tree of life to join them. Of course, Taraboners call themselves the Tree of Man, and claim to be descended from rulers and nobles in the Age of Legends. And Domani claim descent from those who made the Tree of Life in the Age of Legends. There are other possibilities, but you will note, Mother, that at least 3 center around Almuth Plain and Toman Head. The Amerlin's voice became deceptively gentle. Will you make up your mind, daughter? If Arthur Hawkwing's seed is not returning, then this is not prophecy, and it doesn't matter a rotted fish head what ancient tree is meant. I can only give you what I know, Mother, Varen said, looking up from her notes, and leave the decision in your hands. I believe the last of Arthur Hawkwing's foreign armies died long ago, but because I believe it does not make it so. The time of change, of course, refers to the end of an age, and the great lord, the Amerlin slapped the tabletop like a thunderclap. I know very well who the great lord is, daughter. I think you had better go now. She took a deep breath and took hold of herself visibly. Go, Varen. I do not want to become angry with you. I do not want to forget who it was had the cooks leave sweet cakes out at night when I was a novice. Mother, Moiraine said, there is nothing in this to suggest prophecy. Anyone with a little wit and a little knowledge could put together as much, and no one has ever said Myrddraal do not have a sly wit. And of course, Varen said calmly, the man who channels must be one of the 3 young men traveling with you, Moiraine. Moiraine stared in shock. Not aware of the world? I am a fool. Before she realized what she was doing, she had reached out to the pulsing glow she always felt there waiting, to the true source. The one power surged along her veins, charging her with energy, muting the sheen of the power from the Amerlin seat as she did the same. Moiraine had never before even thought of wielding the power against another Aes Sedai. We live in perilous times, and the world hangs in the balance, and what must be done, must be done. It must. Oh, Varen, why did you have to put your nose in where it does not belong? Varen closed her book and slipped it back behind her belt, then looked from one woman to the other. She could not but be aware of the nimbus surrounding each of them, the light that came from touching the true source. Only someone trained in channeling herself could see the glow, but there was no chance of any Aes Sedai missing it in another woman. A hint of satisfaction settled on Veren's face, but no sign that she realized she had hurled a lightning bolt. She only looked as if she had found another piece that fit in a puzzle. Yes, I thought it must be so. Moiraine could not do this alone, and who better to help than her girlhood friend who used to sneak down with her to snitch sweet cakes? She blinked. Forgive me, Mother. I should not have said that. Varen. Varen. The Amyrlin shook her head wonderingly. You accuse your sister and me of... I won't even say it. And you are worried that you've spoken too familiarly to the Amyrlin seat? You bore a hole in the boat and worry that it's raining. Think what you are suggesting, daughter. It is too late for that, Siuan, Moiraine thought. If we had not panicked and reached for the source, perhaps then... But she is sure now. Why are you telling us this, Varen? She said aloud. If you believe what you say, you should be telling it to the other sisters, to the Reds in particular. Varen's eyes widened in surprise. Yes? Yes, I suppose I should. I hadn't thought of that. But then, if I did, you would be stilled, Moiraine, and you, Mother, and the man gentled. No one has ever recorded the progression in a man who wields the power. When does the madness come, exactly? And how does it take him? How quickly does it grow? Can he still function with his body rotting around him? For how long? Unless he is gentled, what will happen to the young man, whichever he is, will happen whether or not I am there to put down the answers. If he is watched and guided, we should be able to keep some record with reasonable safety, for a time at least. And, too, there is the Kariathon cycle. She calmly returned their startled looks. I assume, Mother, that he is the Dragon Reborn. I cannot believe you would do this, leave walking free a man who can channel, unless he was the dragon. She thinks only of the knowledge, Moiraine thought wonderingly. The culmination of the direst prophecy the world knows, perhaps the end of the world, and she cares only about the knowledge, but she is still dangerous for that. Who else knows of this? The Amyrlin's voice was faint, but still sharp. Seraphel, I suppose. Who else, Varen? No one, Mother. Seraphel is not really interested in anything that someone hasn't already set down in a book, preferably as long ago as possible. She thinks there are enough old books and manuscripts and fragments scattered about, lost or forgotten, to equal 10 times what we had gathered in Tar Valon. She feels certain there is enough of the old knowledge still there to be found for... Enough, sister, Moiraine said. She loosed her hold on the true source, and after a moment felt the Amyrlin do the same. It was always a loss to feel the power draining away, like blood and life pouring from an open wound. A part of her wanted to hold on, but unlike some of her sisters, she made it a point of self-discipline not to grow too fond of the feeling. Sit down, Varen, and tell us what you know and how you found it out. Leave out nothing. As Varen took a chair, with a look to the Amyrlin for permission to sit in her presence, Moiraine watched her sadly. It is unlikely, Varen began, that anyone who hasn't studied the old records thoroughly would notice anything except that you were behaving oddly. Forgive me, Mother. It was nearly 20 years ago, with Tar Valon besieged, that I had my first clue, and that was only... Light help me, Varen. How I loved you for those sweet cakes, and for your bosom to weep on. But I will do what I must do. I will. I must.
Perrin peered around the corner at the retreating back of the Aes Sedai. She smelled of lavender soap, though most would not have scented it, even close up. As soon as she turned out of sight, he hurried for the infirmary door. He had already tried to see Mat once, and that Aes Sedai, Lyanna he had heard somebody call her, had nearly snapped his head off without even looking around to see who he was. He felt uneasy around Aes Sedai, especially if they started looking at his eyes. Pausing at the door to listen, he could hear no footsteps down the corridor either way, and nothing on the other side of the door. He went in and closed it softly behind him. The infirmary was a long room with white walls. The entrances to archers' balconies at either end let in lots of light. Matt was in one of the narrow beds that lined the walls. After last night, Perrin had expected most of the beds to have men in them, but in a moment he realized the keep was full of Aes Sedai. The only thing an Aes Sedai could not cure by healing was death. To him, the room smelled of sickness anyway. Perrin grimaced when he thought of that. Matt lay still, eyes closed, hands unmoving atop his blankets. He looked exhausted. Not sick, really, but as if he had worked 3 days in the fields and only now laid down to rest. He smelled wrong, though. It was nothing Perrin could put a name to, just wrong. Perrin sat down carefully on the bed next to Matt's. He always did things carefully. He was bigger than most people, and had been bigger than the other boys as long as he could remember. He had had to be careful so he would not hurt someone accidentally or break things. Now it was second nature to him. He liked to think things through, too, and sometimes talk them over with somebody. With Rand thinking he's a lord, I can't talk to him, and Matt certainly isn't going to have much to say. He had gone into one of the gardens the night before to think things through. The memory still made him a little ashamed. If he had not gone, he would have been in his room to go with Egwene and Matt, and maybe he could have kept them from being hurt. More likely, he knew, he would be in one of those beds like Matt, or dead, but that did not change the way he felt. Still, he had gone to the garden, and it was nothing to do with the Trolloc attack that was worrying him now. Serving women had found him sitting there in the dark, and one of the Lady Amalise's attendants, the Lady Tamora. As soon as they came upon him, Tamora sent one of the others running, and he had heard her say, "Find Liandrin Sedai, quickly." They had stood there watching him, as if they had thought he might vanish in a puff of smoke like a gleeman. That had been when the first alarm bell rang, and everybody in the keep started running. Liandrin, he muttered now. Red Adja. About all they do is hunt for men who channel. You don't think she believes I'm one of those, do you? Matt did not answer, of course. Perrin rubbed his nose ruefully. Now I'm talking to myself. I don't need that on top of everything else. Matt's eyelids fluttered. Who? Perrin? What happened? His eyes did not open all the way, and his voice sounded as if he were still mostly asleep. Don't you remember, Matt? Remember? Matt sleepily raised a hand toward his face, and then let it fall again with a sigh. His eyes began to drift shut. Remember, Egwene asked me, go down, see Fane. He laughed, and it turned into a yawn. She didn't ask, told me. Don't know what happened after. He smacked his lips and resumed the deep, even breathing of sleep. Perrin leaped to his feet as his ears caught the sound of approaching footsteps, but there was nowhere to go. He was still standing there beside Matt's bed when the door opened, and Lyanna came in. She stopped, put her fists on her hips, and looked him slowly up and down. She was nearly as tall as he was. Now you, she said, in tones quiet yet brisk, are almost a pretty enough boy to make me wish I was a green. Almost. But if you've disturbed my patient, well, I dealt with brothers almost as big as you before I went to the tower, so you needn't think those shoulders will help you any. Perrin cleared his throat. Half the time he did not understand what women meant when they said things. Not like Rand. He always knows what to say to the girls. He realized he was scowling and wiped it away. He did not want to think about Rand, but he certainly did not want to upset an Aes Sedai, especially one who was beginning to tap her foot impatiently. I didn't disturb him. He's still sleeping, see? So he is. A good thing for you. Now, what are you doing in here? I remember chasing you out once. You needn't think I don't. I only wanted to know how he is. She hesitated. He is sleeping is how he is, and in a few hours, he will get out of that bed, and you'll think there was never anything wrong with him. The pause made his hackles rise. She was lying, somehow. Aes Sedai never lied, but they did not always tell the truth, either. He was not certain what was going on. Liandrin looking for him, Lyanna lying to him. But he thought it was time he got away from Aes Sedai. There was nothing he could do for Mat. "Thank you," he said. "I'd better let him sleep then. Excuse me." He tried to slide around her to the door, but suddenly her hand shot out and grabbed his face, tilting it down so she could peer into his eyes. Something seemed to pass through him, a warm ripple that started at the top of his head and went to his feet, then came back again. He pulled his head out of her hands. "You're as healthy as a young wild animal," she said, pursing her lips. "But if you were born with those eyes, I am a white cloak." "They're the only eyes I ever had," he growled. He felt a little abashed, speaking to an Aes Sedai in that tone, but he was as surprised as she when he took her gently by the arms and lifted her to one side, setting her down again out of his way. As they stared at each other, he wondered if his eyes were as wide with shock as hers. "Excuse me," he said again, and all but ran. My eyes. My light-cursed eyes. The morning sunlight caught his eyes, and they glinted like burnished gold. Rand twisted on his bed, trying to find a comfortable position on the thin mattress. Sunlight streamed through the arrow slits, painting the bare stone walls. He had not slept during the remainder of the night, and tired as he was sure he could not sleep now. The leather jerkin lay on the floor between his bed and the wall, but aside from that, he was fully dressed, even to his new boots. His sword stood propped beside the bed, and his bow and quiver rested in a corner across the bundled cloaks. He could not rid himself of the feeling that he should take the chance Moraine had given him and leave immediately. The urge had been with him all night. 3 times he had risen to go. Twice he had gone as far as opening the door. The halls had been empty except for a few servants doing late chores. The way had been clear. But he had to know. Perrin came in, head down and yawning, and Rand sat up. "How is Egwene and Mat?" "She's asleep, so they tell me. They wouldn't let me into the women's apartments to see her. Mat is..." Suddenly Perrin scowled at the floor. "If you're so interested, why haven't you gone to see him yourself? I thought you were not interested in us anymore. You said you weren't." He pulled open his door of the wardrobe and began rummaging for a clean shirt. "I did go to the infirmary, Perrin. There was an Aes Sedai there, that tall one who's always with the Amyrlin seat. She said Mat was asleep, and I was in the way, and I could come back some other time. She sounded like Master Thane ordering the men at the mill. You know how Master Thane is, all full of snap and do it right the first time and do it right now." Perrin did not answer. He just shucked off his coat and pulled his shirt off over his head. Rand studied his friend's back for a moment, then dug up a laugh. "You want to hear something? You know what she said to me? The Aes Sedai in the infirmary, I mean. You saw how tall she is. As tall as most men. A hand taller, and she could almost look me in the eyes. Well, she stared me up and down, and then she muttered, 'Tall, aren't you? Where were you when I was 16, or even 30? And then she laughed as if it was all a joke. What do you think of that?' Perrin finished tugging on a clean shirt and gave him a sidelong look. With his burly shoulders and thick curls, he made Rand think of a hurt bear. A bear that did not understand why he had been hurt. "Perrin, If you want to make jokes with Aes Sedai," Perrin broke in, "that's up to you, my lord." He began stuffing his shirt tail into his breeches. "I don't spend much time being witty, is that the word? Witty with Aes Sedai. But then, I'm only a clumsy blacksmith, and I might be in somebody's way, my lord." Snatching his coat from the floor, he started for the door. "Burn me, Perrin, I'm sorry. I was afraid and I thought I was in trouble. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. I don't know. And I didn't want you and Mat to be in it with me. Light, all the women were looking for me last night. I think that's part of the trouble I'm in. I think so. And Liandrin, she..." He threw up his hands. "Perrin, believe me, you don't want any part of this." Perrin had stopped, but he stood facing the door and only turned his head enough for Rand to see one golden eye. "Looking for you. Maybe they were looking for all of us. No, they were looking for me. I wish they hadn't been, but I know better. Perrin shook his head. Leandrin wanted me anyway, I know. I heard. Rand frowned. Why would she? It doesn't change anything. Look, I opened my mouth and said what I shouldn't. I didn't mean it, Perrin. Now please, would you tell me about Matt? He's asleep. Liana, that's the Aes Sedai, said he would be on his feet in a few hours. He shrugged uncomfortably. I think she was lying. I know Aes Sedai never lie, not so you can catch them, but she was lying or keeping something back. He paused, looking at Rand sideways. You didn't mean all that? We will leave here together? You and me and Matt? I can't, Perrin. I can't tell you why, but I really do have to go by my... Perrin, wait! The door slammed behind his friend. Rand fell back on the bed. I can't tell you, he muttered. He pounded his fist on the side of the bed. I can't. But you can go now, a voice said in the back of his head. Egwene's going to be all right, and Matt will be up and around in an hour or two. You can go now, before Moraine changes her mind. He started to sit up when a pounding on the door made him leap to his feet. If it was Perrin come back, he would not knock. The pounding came again. Who is it? Lan strode in, pushing the door to behind him with his boot heel. As usual, he wore his sword over a plain coat of green that was nearly invisible in the woods. This time, though, he had a wide golden cord tied high around his left arm, the fringed ends hanging almost to his elbow. On the knot was pinned a golden crane in flight, the symbol of Malkir. The Amyrlin seat wants you, sheepherder. You can't go like that. Out of that shirt and brush your hair. You look like a haystack. He jerked open the wardrobe and began pawing through the clothes Rand meant to leave behind. Rand stood stiff where he was. He felt as though he had been hit in the head with a hammer. He had expected it, of course, in a way, but he had been sure he would be gone before the summons came. She knows. Light, I'm sure of it. What do you mean, she wants me? I'm leaving, Lan. You were right. I'm going to the stable right now, get my horse, and leave. You should have done that last night. The warder tossed a white silk shirt onto the bed. No one refuses an audience with the Amyrlin seat, sheepherder. Not the Lord Captain Commander of the White Cloaks himself. Pedron Niall might spend the trip planning how to kill her, if he could do it and get away, but he would come. He turned around with one of the high-collared coats in his hands and held it up. This one will do. Tangled, long-thorned briars climbed each red sleeve in a thick gold-embroidered line and ran around each cuff. Golden herons stood on the collars, which were edged with gold. The color is right, too. He seemed to be amused at something, or satisfied. Come on, sheepherder. Change your shirt. Move. Reluctantly, Rand pulled the coarse wool workman's shirt over his head. I feel like a fool, he muttered. A silk shirt? I never wore a silk shirt in my life. And I never wore so fancy a coat, either, even on a feast day. Why, if Perrin sees me in that... Burn me, after all that fool talk about being a lord. If he sees me in that, he'll never listen to reason. You can't go before the Amyrlin seat dressed like a groom fresh out of the stable, sheepherder. Let me see your boots. They'll do. Well, get on with it. Get on with it. You don't keep the Amyrlin waiting. Wear your sword. My sword? The silk shirt over his head muffled Rand's yelp. He yanked it the rest of the way on. In the women's apartments? Lan, if I go for an audience with the Amyrlin seat, wearing a sword, she'll... Do nothing, Lan cut him off dryly. If the Amyrlin is afraid of you, and it's smarter for you to think she isn't because I don't know anything that could frighten that woman, it won't be for a sword. Now remember, you kneel when you go before her. One knee only, mind, he added sharply. You're not some merchant caught giving short weight. Maybe you had better practice it. I know how I think. I saw the Queen's guards knelt to Queen Morghese. The ghost of a smile touched the warder's lips. Yes, you'd do it just as they did. That will give them something to think about. Rand frowned. Why are you telling me this, Lan? You're a warder. You're acting as if you are on my side. I am on your side, sheepherder. A little. Enough to help you a bit. The warder's face was stone, and sympathetic words sounded strange in that rough voice. What training you've had I gave you, and I'll not have you grumbling and sniveling. The wheel weaves us all into the pattern as it wills. You have less freedom about it than most, but by the light you can still face it on your feet. You remember who the Amerlin seat is, sheepherder, and you show her proper respect, but you do what I tell you, and you look her in the eye. Well, don't stand there gaping. Tuck in your shirt. Rand shut his mouth and tucked in his shirt. Remember who she is? Burn me what I wouldn't give to forget who she is. Lan kept up a running flow of instructions while Rand shrugged into the red coat and buckled on his sword. What to say and to whom, and what not to say. What to do and what not. How to move, even. He was not sure he could remember it all. Most of it sounded odd and easy to forget. And he was sure whatever he forgot would be just the thing to make the Aes Sedai angry with him. If they aren't already. If Moraine told the Amerlin seat, who else did she tell? Lan, why can't I just leave the way I planned? By the time she knew I was not coming, I'd be a league outside the walls and galloping. And she'd have trackers after you before you had gone too. What the Amerlin wants, sheepherder, she gets. He adjusted Rand's sword belt so the heavy buckle was centered. What I do is the best I can for you, believe it. But why all this? What does it mean? Why do I put my hand over my heart if the Amerlin seat stands up? Why refuse anything but water? Not that I want to eat a meal with her. Then dribble some on the floor and say, the land thirsts. And if she asks how old I am, why tell her how long it is since I was given the sword? I don't understand half of what you've told me. 3 drops, sheepherder. Don't pour it. You sprinkle 3 drops only. You can understand later, so long as you remember now. Think of it as upholding custom. The Amerlin will do with you as she must. If you believe you can avoid it, then you believe you can fly to the moon like Len. You can't escape, but maybe you can hold your own for a while, and perhaps you can keep your pride at least. Like burn me, I am probably wasting my time, but I've nothing better to do. Hold still. From his pocket, the warder produced a long length of wide-fringed golden cord and tied it around Rand's left arm in a complicated knot. On the knot he fastened a red enameled pin, an eagle with its wings spread. I had that made to give you, and now is as good a time as any. That will make them think. There was no doubt about it now. The warder was smiling. Rand looked down at the pin worriedly. Cultazar, the red eagle of Manetheren. On to the Dark One's foot, he murmured, and a bramble to his hand. He looked at the warder. Manetheren's long dead and forgotten, Lan. It's just a name in a book now. There is only the 2 rivers. Whatever else I am, I'm a shepherd and a farmer, that's all. Well, the sword that could not be broken was shattered in the end, sheepherder, but it fought the shadow to the last. There is one rule above all others for being a man. Whatever comes, face it on your feet. Now, are you ready? The Amerlin seat waits. With a cold knot on the pit of his belly, Rand followed the warder into the hall. Chapter 8. The Dragon Reborn. Rand walked stiff-legged and nervous at first beside the warder. Face it on your feet. It was easy for Lan to say. He had not been summoned by the Amerlin seat. He was not wondering if he would be gentled before the day was done, or worse. Rand felt as if he had something caught in his throat. He could not swallow, and he wanted to badly. The corridors bustled with people, servants going about their morning chores, warriors wearing swords over lounging robes. A few young girls wearing small practice swords stayed imitating the way they walked. No sign of but an air of alertness clung even to the children. Grown men looked like cats waiting for a pack of rats. Ingtar gave Rand and Lan a peculiar look, almost troubled, opening his mouth, then saying nothing as they passed him. Godjin, tall and lean and sallow, bumped his fists over his head and shouted, Kaishar, Malkir! Kaishar, Manetheren! True blood of Malkir, true blood of Manetheren. Rand jumped. Light. Why did he say that? Don't be a fool, he told himself. They all know about Manetheren here. They know every old story, if it has fighting in it. Burn me, I have to take a rein on myself. Lan raised his fists in reply. Taishar Shinar! If he made a run for it, could he lose himself in the crowd long enough to reach his horse? If she sends trackers after me? With every step, he grew more tense. As they approached the women's apartments, Lan suddenly snapped. Cat crosses the courtyard. Startled, Rand instinctively assumed the walking stance, as he had been taught. Back straight, but every muscle loose, as if he hung from a wire at the top of his head. It was a relaxed, almost arrogant saunter. Relaxed on the outside, he certainly did not feel it inside. He had no time to wonder what he was doing. They rounded the last corridor and stepped with each other. The women at the entrance to the women's apartments looked up calmly as they came closer. Some sat behind slanted tables, checking large ledgers and sometimes making an entry. Others were knitting or working with needle and embroidery hoop. Ladies in silks kept this watch, as well as women in livery. The arched doors stood open, unguarded except for the women. No more was needed. No Shinaran man would enter uninvited, but any Shinaran man stood ready to defend that door if needed, and he would be aghast at the need. Rand's stomach churned, harsh and acid. They'll take one look at our swords and turn us away. Well, that's right. If they turn us back, maybe I can still get away. If they don't call the guards down on us. He clung to the stance Lan had given him, as he would to a floating branch in a flood. Holding it was the only thing that kept him from turning tail and running. One of the Lady Amalisa's attendants, Nasira, a round-faced woman, put aside her embroidery and stood as they came to a stop. Her eyes flickered across their swords, and her mouth tightened, but she did not mention them. All of them stopped what they were doing to watch, silent and intent. Honor to you both, Nasira said, bowing her head slightly. She glanced at Rand so quickly he was almost not sure he had seen it. It reminded him of what Perrin had said. The Amarlin seat awaits you. She motioned, and two other ladies, not servants, they were being honored, stepped forward for escorts. The women bowed, hair more than Nasira had, and motioned them through the archway. They both gave Rand a sidelong glance, then did not look at him again. Were they looking for all of us, or just me? Why all of us? Inside, they got the looks Rand expected. Two men in the women's apartments, where men were rare, and their swords caused more than one raised eyebrow, but none of the women spoke. The two men left knots of conversation in their path, soft murmurs too low for Rand to make out. Lan strode along as if he did not even notice. Rand kept pace behind their escorts and wished he could hear. And then they reached the Amarlin seat's chambers, with three Aes Sedai in the hall outside the door. The tall Aes Sedai, Lyanna, held her gold-flamed staff. Rand did not know the other two, one of the white Ajah, and one yellow by their fringe. He remembered their faces, though, staring at him as he had run through these same halls. Smooth Aes Sedai faces with knowing eyes. They studied him with arched eyebrows and pursed lips. The women who had brought Lan and Rand curtsied, handing them over to the Aes Sedai.
Oh yeah, Christopher, you have a good one.
With a slight smile. Despite the smile, her voice had a snap to it. What have you brought the Amarlin seat today, Lan Gaidin? A young lion? Better you don't let any greens see this one, or one of them will bond him before he can take a breath. Greens like to bond them young. Rand wondered if it was really possible to sweat inside your skin. He felt as if he was. He wanted to look at Lan, but he remembered this part of the warder's instructions. I am Rand al'Thor, son of Tam al'Thor, of the Two Rivers, which once was Manetheren. As I have been summoned by the Amarlin seat, Lyanna Sedai, so do I come. I stand ready. He was surprised that his voice did not shake once. Lyanna blinked, and her smile faded to a thoughtful look. This is supposed to be a shepherd, Lan Gaidin. He was not so sure of himself this morning. He is a man, Lyanna Sedai, Lan said firmly. No more and no less. We are what we are. The Aes Sedai shook her head. The world grows stranger every day. I suppose the blacksmith will wear a crown and speak in high chant. Wait here. She vanished inside to announce them. She was only gone a few moments, but Rand was uncomfortably aware of the eyes of the remaining Aes Sedai. He tried to return their gaze levelly, the way Lan had told him to, and they put their heads together, whispering. What are they saying? What do they know? Light. Was that what Lan meant about facing whatever comes? Lyanna returned, motioning Rand to go in. When Lan started to follow, she thrust her staff across his chest, stopping him. Not you, Lan Gaidin. Moiraine Sedai has a task for you. Your lion cub will be safe enough by himself. The door swung shut behind Rand, but not before he heard Lan's voice, fierce and strong, but low for his ear alone. Taishar Manetheren. Moiraine sat to one side of the room, and one of the brown Aes Sedai he had seen in the dungeon sat to the other. But it was the woman in the tall chair behind the wide table who held his eyes. The curtains had been partially drawn over the arrow slits, but the gaps let in enough light behind her to make her face hard to see clearly. He still recognized her, though. The Amyrlin seat. Quickly he dropped to one knee, left hand on sword hilt, right fist pressed to the patterned rug, and bowed his head. As you have summoned me, Mother, so have I come. I stand ready. He lifted his head in time to see her eyebrows rise. Do you now, boy? She sounded almost amused, and something else he could not make out. She certainly did not look amused. Stand up, boy, and let me have a look at you. He straightened and tried to keep his face relaxed. It was an effort not to clench his hands. 3 Aes Sedai. How many does it take to gentle a man? They sent a dozen or more after Loghain. Would Moiraine do that to me? He met the Amyrlin seat's look, eye to eye. She did not blink. Sit, boy, she said finally, gesturing to a ladder-backed chair that had been pulled around squarely in front of the table. This will not be short, I fear. Thank you, Mother. He bowed his head, then, as Lan had told him, glanced at the chair and touched his sword. By your leave, Mother, I will stand. The watch is not done. The Amyrlin seat made an exasperated sound and looked at Moiraine. Have you let Lan at him, daughter? This will be difficult enough without him picking up warder ways. Lan has been teaching all the boys, Mother, Moiraine replied calmly. He has spent a little more time with this one than the others because he carries a sword. The brown Aes Sedai shifted on her chair. The Gaidin are stiff-necked and proud, Mother, but useful. I would not be without Tomas, as you would not lose Ulrich. I have even heard a few Reds say they sometimes wish for a warder. And the Greens, of course. The 3 Aes Sedai were all ignoring him now. This sword, the Amyrlin seat said, it appears to be a heron mark blade. How did he come by that, Moiraine? Tam al'Thor left the 2 Rivers as a boy, Mother. He joined the army of Ilion and served in the White Cloak War and the last 2 wars with Tyr. In time, he rose to be a blade master and the 2nd captain of the Companions. After the Aiel War, Tam al'Thor returned to the 2 Rivers with a wife from Caemlyn and an infant boy. It would have saved much had I known this earlier, but I know it now. Rand stared at Moiraine. He knew Tam had left the 2 Rivers and come back with an Outlander wife and the sword, but the rest? Where did you learn all that? Not in Emond's Field. Unless Nynaeve told you more than she's ever told me. An infant boy? She doesn't say his son, but I am. Against Tyr. The Amyrlin seat frowned slightly. Well, there was blame enough on both sides in those wars. Fool men who would rather fight than talk. Can you tell if the blade is authentic, Varen? There are tests, Mother. Then take it and test it, daughter. The 3 women were not even looking at him. Rand stepped back, gripping the hilt hard. My father gave this sword to me, he said angrily. Nobody is taking it from me. It was only then that he realized Varen had not moved from her chair. He looked at them in confusion, trying to recover his equilibrium. So, the the Amerlin Seat said. You have some fire in you besides whatever Lan put in. Good. You will need it. I am what I am, Mother, he managed smoothly enough. Here comes. The Amerlin Seat grimaced. Lan has been at you. Listen to me, boy. In a few hours, Ingtar will leave to find the stolen horn. Your friend Matt will go with him. I expect that your other friend, Perrin, will go also. Do you wish to accompany them? Matt and Perrin are going? Why? Belatedly, he remembered to add a respectful, Mother. You know of the dagger your friend carried? A twist of her mouth showed what she thought of the dagger. That was taken too. Unless it is found, the link between him and the blade cannot be broken completely, and he will die. You can ride with them if you want, or you can stay here. No doubt Lord Agramar will let you remain as a guest as long as you wish. I will be leaving today as well. Moraine Sedai will accompany me, and so will Egwene and Nynaeve. So you will stay alone if you stay. The choice is yours. Rand stared at her. She is saying I can go as I want. Is that what she brought me here for? Matt is dying. He glanced at Moraine, sitting impassively with her hands folded in her lap. She looked as if nothing in the world could concern her less than where he went. Which way are you trying to push me, Aes Sedai? Burn me, but I'll go another. But if Matt's dying, I can't abandon him. Light, how are we going to find that dagger? You do not have to make the choice now, the Amerlin said. She did not seem to care either. But you will have to choose before Ingtar leaves. I will ride with Ingtar, Mother. The Amerlin Seat nodded absently. Now that is done, we'll move on to important matters. I know you can channel, boy. What do you know? Rand's mouth fell open. Caught up in worrying about Matt, her casual words hit him like a swinging barn door. All of Lan's advice and instructions went spinning. He stared at her, licking his lips. It was one thing to think she knew, entirely another to find out she really did. The sweat finally seeped out on his forehead. She leaned forward in her seat, waiting for his answer, but he had the feeling she wanted to lean back. He remembered what Lan had said. If she's afraid of you, he wanted to laugh. If she was afraid of him. No, I can't. I mean, I didn't do it on purpose. It just happened. I don't want to channel the power. I won't ever do it again. I swear it. You don't want to, the Amerlin Seat said. Well, that's wise of you. And foolish, too. Some can be taught to channel. Most cannot. A few, though, have the seed in them at birth. Sooner or later, they wield the one power whether they want to or not, as surely as roe makes fish. You will continue to channel, boy. You can't help it. And you had better learn to channel. Learn to control it, or you will not live long enough to go mad. The one power kills those who cannot control its flow. How am I supposed to learn? He demanded. Moraine and Varen just sat there, unruffled, watching him. Like spiders. How? Moraine claims she can't teach me anything, and I don't know how to learn or what. I don't want to anyway. I want to stop. Can't you understand that? To stop! I told you the truth, Rand, Moraine said. She sounded as if they were having a pleasant conversation. Those who could teach you, the male Aes Sedai, are 3,000 years dead. No Aes Sedai living can teach you to touch saidar any more than you could learn to touch saidar. A bird cannot teach a fish to fly, nor a fish teach a bird to swim. I have always thought that was a bad saying, Varen said suddenly. There are birds that dive and swim, and in the sea of storms are fish that fly, with long fins that stretch out as wide as your outstretched arms, and beaks like swords that can pierce. Her words trailed off, and she became flustered. Moraine and the Amerlin Seat were staring at her without expression. Rand took the interruption to try to regain some control of himself. As Tam had taught him long ago, he formed a single flame in his mind and fed his fears into it, seeking emptiness, the stillness of the void. The flame seemed to grow until it enveloped everything, until it was too large to contain or imagine any longer. With that, it was gone, leaving in its place a sense of peace. At its edges, emotions still flickered, fear and anger like black blotches, but the void held. Thoughts skimmed across its surface like pebbles across ice. The Aes Sedai's attention was only off him for a moment, but when they turned back, his face was calm. "Why are you talking to me like this, Mother?" he asked. "You should be gentling me." The Amarlin Seat frowned and turned to Moraine. "Did Lan teach him this?" "No, Mother. He had it from Tam Althor." "Why?" Rand demanded again. The Amarlin Seat looked him straight in the eye and said, "Because you are the dragon reborn." The void rocked. The world rocked. Everything seemed to spin around him. He concentrated on nothing, and the emptiness returned. The world steadied. "No, Mother. I can channel the light, help me, but I am not Rowland Darksbane, nor Gwer Amalasan, nor Urien Stonebow. You can gentle me or kill me, or let me go. But I will not be a tame false dragon on a Tarvalin leash." He heard Varen gasp, and the Amarlin's eyes widened, a gaze as hard as blue rock. It did not affect him. It slid off the void within. "Where did you hear those names?" the Amarlin demanded. "Who told you Tarvalin pulls the lines on any false dragon?" "A friend, Mother," he said. "A gleeman. His name was Tom Merrilin. He's dead now." Moraine made a sound, and he glanced at her. She claimed Tom was not dead, but she had never offered any proof, and he could not see how any man could survive grappling head to a fade. The thought was extraneous, and it faded away. There was only the void and the oneness now. "You are not a false dragon," the Amarlin said firmly. "You are the true dragon reborn." "I'm a shepherd from the Two Rivers, Mother." "Daughter, tell him the story." "A true story, boy. Listen well." Moraine began speaking. Rand kept his eyes on the Amarlin's face, but he heard. "Nearly 20 years ago, the Aiel crossed the spine of the world, the Dragon Wall, the only time they have ever done so. They ravaged through Cairhien, destroyed every army sent against them, burned the city of Cairhien itself, and fought all the way to Tarvalin. It was winter and snowing, but cold or heat mean little to an Aiel. The final battle, the last that counted, was fought outside the Shining Walls in the shadow of Dragonmount. In 3 days and nights of fighting, the Aiel were turned back. Or rather, they turned back, for they had done what they came to do, which was to kill King Layman of Cairhien for his sin against the tree. It is then that my story begins, and yours. They came over the Dragon Wall like a flood, all the way to the Shining Walls." Rand waited for the memories to fade, but it was Tam's voice he heard, Tam sick and raving, pulling up secrets from his past. The voice clung outside the void, clamoring to get in. "I was one of the accepted then," Moraine said, "as was our mother, the Amarlin Seat. We were soon to be raised to sisterhood, and that night we stood attendance on the then Amarlin. Her keeper of the chronicles, Gitara Moroso, was there. Every other full sister in Tarvalin was out healing as many wounded as she could find, even the Reds. It was dawn. The fire on the hearth could not keep the cold out. The snow had finally stopped, and in the Amarlin's chambers in the White Tower, we could smell the smoke of outlying villages burned in the fighting. Battles are always hot, even in the snow. Had to get away from the stink of death." Tam's delirious voice clawed at the empty calm inside Rand. The void trembled and shrank, steadied, then wavered again. The Amarlin's eyes bored at him. He felt sweat on his face again. "It was all a fever dream," he said. "He was sick." He raised his voice. "My name is Rand al'Thor. I'm a shepherd. My father is Tam al'Thor, and my mother was—" Moraine had paused for him, but now her unchanging voice cut him off. soft and relentless. The Koreathon Psycho, the prophecies of the dragon, says that the dragon will be reborn on the slopes of Dragon Mount, where he died during the breaking of the world. Gitara Sadai had the foretelling sometimes. She was old, her hair as white as the snow outside. But when she had the foretelling, it was strong. The morning light from the windows was strengthening as I handed her a cup of tea. The Amelin Seat asked me what news there was from the field of battle. And Gitara Sadai started up out of her chair, her arms and legs rigid, trembling, her face as if she looked into the pit of doom at Sheol Ghul, and she cried out, "He is born again. I feel him. The dragon takes his first breath on the slope of Dragon Mount. He is coming. He is coming. Light helpless. Light help the world. He lies in the snow and cries like the thunder. He burns like the sun." And she fell forward into my arms, dead. Slope of the mountain. Heard a baby cry. Gave birth there alone before she died. Child blue with the cold. Rand tried to force Tam's voice away. The boy grew smaller. "A fever dream," he gasped. "I couldn't leave a child. I was born in the Two Rivers. Always knew you wanted children, Kari." He pulled his eyes away from the Amelin's gaze. He tried to force the void to hold. He knew that was not the way, but it was collapsing in him. "Yes, lass. Rand is a good name." "I am Rand al'Thor." His legs trembled. "And so we knew the dragon was reborn," Moraine went on. "The Amelin swore us to secrecy, we two. For she knew not all the sisters would see the rebirth as it must be seen. She set us to searching. There were many fatherless children after that battle. Too many. But we found a story that one man had found an infant on the mountain. That was all. A man and an infant boy. So we searched on. For years we searched, finding other clues, poring over the prophecies. He will be of the ancient blood and raised by the old blood. That was one. There were others. But there are many places where the old blood, descended from the age of legends, remains strong. Then in the Two Rivers, where the old blood of Manetheren seethes still like a river in flood, in Heaven's Field, I found 3 boys whose name days were within weeks of the battle at Dragonmount. And one of them can channel. Do you think Trollocs came after you just because you are ta'veren? You are the dragon reborn." Rand's knees gave way. He dropped to a squat, hands slapping the rug to catch himself from falling on his face. The void was gone, the stillness shattered. He raised his head, and they were looking at him, the 3 Aes Sedai. Their faces were serene, smooth as unruffled ponds, but their eyes did not blink. "My father is Tam al'Thor, and I was born..." They stared at him, unmoving. "They're lying. I am not what they say. Some way, somehow, they're lying, trying to use me. I will not be used by you." "An anchor is not demeaned by being used to hold a boat," the Amelin said. "You were made for a purpose, Rand al'Thor. When the winds of Tarman Gaden scour the earth, he will face the shadow and bring forth light again in the world. The prophecies must be fulfilled, or the Dark One will break free and remake the world in his image. The last battle is coming, and you were born to unite mankind and lead them against the Dark One." "Balsamon is dead," Rand said hoarsely, and the Amelin snorted like a stable hand. "If you believe that, you are as much a fool as the Domani. Many there believe he is dead, or say they do. But I notice they still won't risk naming him. The Dark One lives, and he is breaking free. You will face the Dark One. It is your destiny." It is your destiny. He had heard that before, in a dream, that had maybe not been entirely a dream. He wondered what the Amelin would say if she knew Baalzamon had spoken to him in dreams. "It's done with. Baalzamon is dead. I saw him die." Suddenly it came to him that he was crouching like a toad, huddling under their eyes. He tried to form the void again, but voices whirled through his head, sweeping away every effort. It is your destiny. Babe lying in the snow. You are the dragon reborn. Balsamon is dead. Rand is a good name, Kari. I will not be used. Drawing on his own native stubbornness, he forced himself back upright. Face it on your feet. You can keep your pride, at least. The three Aes Sedai watched with no expression. What? With an effort, he steadied his voice. What are you going to do to me? Nothing, the Amyrlin said, and he blinked. It was not the answer he had expected, the one he had feared. You say you want to accompany your friend with Ingtar, and you may. I have not marked you out in any way. Some of the sisters may know you are ta'veren, but no more. Only we three know who you truly are. Your friend Perrin will be brought to me as you were, and I will visit your other friend in the infirmary. You may go as you will, without fear that we will set the Red Sisters on you. Who you truly are. Anger flared up in him, hot and corrosive. He forced it to stay inside, hidden. Why? The prophecies must be fulfilled. We let you walk free, knowing what you are, because otherwise the world we know will die, and the Dark One will cover the earth with fire and death. Mark me, not all Aes Sedai feel the same. There are some here in Faldara who would strike you down if they knew a tenth of what you are, and feel no more remorse than for gutting a fish. But then there are men who've no doubt laughed with you, who would do the same if they knew. Have a care, Rand al'Thor, Dragon Reborn. He looked at each of them in turn. The prophecies are no part of me. They returned his gaze so calmly it was hard to believe they were trying to convince him he was the most hated, the most feared man in the history of the world. He had gone right through fear and come out the other side in some place cold. Anger was all that kept him warm. They could gentle him or burn him to a crisp where he stood, and he no longer cared. A part of Lan's instructions came back to him. Left hand on the hilt, he twisted the sword behind him, catching the scabbard in his right, then bowed, arms straight. By your leave, Mother. May I depart this place? I give you leave to go, my son. Straightening, he stood there a moment longer. I will not be used, he told them. There was a long silence as he turned and left.
The silence stretched on in the room after Rand left until it was broken by a long breath from the Amyrlin. I cannot make myself like what we just did, she said. It was necessary, but did it work, daughters? Moiraine shook her head, just the slightest movement. I do not know, but it was necessary, and is. Necessary, Verin agreed. She touched her forehead, then peered at the dampness on her fingers. He is strong, and as stubborn as you said, Moiraine. Much stronger than I expected. We may have to gentle him after all before... Her eyes widened. But we cannot, can we? The prophecies. The light forgive us for what we are loosing on the world. The prophecies, Moiraine said, nodding. Afterwards we will do as we must, as we do now. As we must, the Amyrlin said. Yes, but when he learns to channel, the light help us all. The silence returned. There was a storm coming. Nynaeve felt it. A big storm, worse than she had ever seen. She could listen to the wind and hear what the weather would be. All wisdoms claimed to be able to do that, though many could not. Nynaeve had felt more comfortable with the ability before learning it was a manifestation of the power. Any woman who could listen to the wind could channel, though most were probably as she had been, unaware of what she was doing, getting it only in fits and starts. This time, though, something was wrong. Outside, the morning sun was a golden ball in a clear blue sky, and birds sang in the gardens, but that was not it. There would have been nothing to listening to the wind if she could not foretell the weather before the signs were visible. There was something wrong with the feeling this time, something not quite the way it usually was. The storm felt distant, too far off for her to feel at all. Yet it felt as if the sky above should have been pouring down rain and snow and hail all at the same time, with winds howling to shake the stones of the keep. And she could feel the good weather, too, lasting for days yet, but that was muted under the other. A blue jay perched in an arrow slit, like a mockery of her weather sense, peering into the hallway. When it saw her, it vanished in a flash of blue and white feathers. She stared at the spot where the bird had been. There is a storm, and there isn't. It means something, but what? Far down the hall, full of women and small children, she saw Rand striding away, his escort of women half running to keep up. Nynaeve nodded firmly. If there was a storm that was not a storm, he would be the center of it. Gathering her skirts, she hurried after him. Women with whom she had grown friendly since coming to Fal Dara tried to speak to her. They knew Rand had come with her and that they were both from the Two Rivers, and they wanted to know why the Amyrlin had summoned him. The Amyrlin's seat. Ice in the pit of her belly, she broke into a run, but before she left the women's apartments, she had lost him around too many corners and beyond too many people. Which way did he go? She asked Nisura. There was no need to say who. She heard Rand's name in the conversation of the other women clustered around the arched doors. I don't know, Nynaeve. He came out as fast as if he had Heartsbane himself at his heels. As well he might, coming here with a sword at his belt. The Dark One should be the least of his worries after that. What is the world coming to? And him presented to the Amyrlin in her chambers, no less. Tell me, Nynaeve, is he really a prince in your land? The other women stopped talking and leaned closer to listen. Nynaeve was not sure what she answered, something that made them let her go on. She hurried away from the women's apartments, head swiveling at every crossing corridor to look for him, fists clenched. Light, what have they done to him? I should have gotten him away from Moiraine somehow, the light blind her. I'm his wisdom. Are you? A small voice taunted. You've abandoned Emond's Field to fend for itself. Can you still call yourself their wisdom? I did not abandon them, she told herself fiercely. I brought Mavra Malon up from Devon Ride to look after matters till I get back. She can deal well enough with the mayor and the village council, and she gets on well with the women's circle. Mavra will have to get back to her own village. No village can do without its wisdom for long. Nynaeve cringed inside. She had been gone months from Emond's Field. I am the wisdom of Emond's Field, she said aloud. A liveried servant carrying a bolt of cloth blinked at her, then bowed low before scurrying off. By his face, he was eager to be anywhere else. Blushing, Nynaeve looked around to see if anyone had noticed. There were only a few men in the hall, engrossed in their own conversations, and some women in black and gold going about their business, giving her a bow or curtsy as she passed. She had had that argument with herself 100 times before, but this was the first time it had come to talking to herself out loud. She muttered under her breath, then pressed her lips firmly together when she realized what she was doing. She was finally beginning to realize her search was futile when she came on Lan, his back to her, looking down on the outer courtyard through an arrow slit.
Alright, everyone, I'm going to call into the stream for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone continue to stop by. I appreciate all y'all support. Till next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.